Dad, you destroyed our family. That was the last thing my daughter screamed at me before cutting me out of her life for 8 long years. When she finally demanded we meet at my lawyer's office, she walked in with a smug smirk, absolutely certain she was about to walk away with everything I owned. She thought I was just a tired, broken old man ready to surrender. But as the lawyer slid a single piece of paper across the mahogany table, her arrogant confidence shattered into a million pieces. I had been waiting for this exact moment for nearly a decade, watching as the color completely drained from her face when the unexpected truth was finally revealed. The tables had turned, and the game she thought she was winning had already been over before she even sat down. My name is Martin. I am 70 years old, and for the past 8 years I have lived a quiet life, letting my only daughter believe I was nothing more than a defeated old man. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family member who underestimated your worth and mistook your silence for weakness. The air in Mr. Vogel's downtown office was thick and cold. I sat quietly in the heavy leather chair, my hands resting on my cane. Across the polished mahogany table sat Kendra, my 38-year-old daughter, and her husband Logan. Logan, a 42-year-old white man who wore a suit that looked expensive but fit him poorly, had his legs crossed, shaking his foot with aggressive impatience. Kendra did not even bother to look me in the eye when she walked in. She simply dropped her designer bag on an empty chair and sighed loudly as if my mere existence was an unbearable inconvenience to her busy schedule. "Let us not waste time," Logan barked, leaning forward and tapping his knuckles against the glass table. "We know why we are here. Martin, your health is obviously failing. People in the neighborhood are talking. We heard about your heart condition. It is time to be realistic. You cannot manage that massive house on your own anymore, and frankly, we are tired of waiting for the inevitable." Kendra finally looked at me, her eyes devoid of any warmth or familial affection. "Logan is right, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with a sickly, sweet condescension that made my stomach turn. "You are 70 years old. You are living in the past. We need you to sign over the property deed and grant Logan full power of attorney today. It is the responsible thing to do. We can sell the estate, put you in a nice, quiet, assisted living facility, and use the rest of the funds to manage our investments. It is essentially an early inheritance. Why drag this out until you drop dead?" They were asking me to hand over my entire life, my home, and my autonomy simply because I had become an obstacle to their greed. Logan aggressively nudged a thick stack of papers toward Mr. Vogel. "We had our legal team draft this up," Logan demanded. "Just have the old man sign it so we can all move on with our lives." I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not defend myself against their cruel words. I simply sat there in absolute silence, slowly rubbing the worn leather strap of my old wristwatch with my thumb. My silence unnerved them, but it was not the silence of a defeated man. It was the calculated stillness of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Looking at Kendra's impatient, irritated face, a flood of dark memories rushed back to me. 8 years ago, this same woman had stood in my living room, pointing a trembling finger at me, accusing me of a crime I did not commit. My late wife Cynthia was battling stage 4 cancer. I had worked my entire life as a senior corporate accountant, carefully building a nest egg to ensure we would never have to worry. I had liquidated over $250,000 to pay for Cynthia's experimental treatments. But when the time came to wire the funds to the hospital, the account was empty, completely drained. Kendra had forged my signature and transferred every single penny into a shadow account controlled by Logan to fund one of his phantom real estate schemes. When the bank notified me, I confronted her. Instead of confessing, she panicked. She went to Cynthia, who was lying weak in her hospice bed, and told her a vile, unforgivable lie. Kendra swore to her dying mother that I had gambled the money away. She told our entire extended family that I was a secret addict who had squandered my wife's only chance at survival. She painted herself as the tragic victim of a toxic, destructive father. To protect Cynthia from dying with a broken heart and to keep my daughter out of federal prison, I swallowed the blame. I let Cynthia pass away believing I had failed her, and I let Kendra cut me off, parading around town as the righteous survivor of my supposed abuse. For 8 years, I wore the mask of the disgraced broke widower. They thought I was a fragile old fool. They had no idea that I had taken the life insurance money and quietly built an underground real estate empire that now owned half the commercial blocks in the city. "Are you deaf, old man?" Logan snapped, snapping his fingers in front of my face to pull me out of my thoughts. Sign the papers. I have a tea time at the country club at 2, and I am not missing it because you want to be stubborn." I stopped rubbing my watch. I looked at Logan, then at Kendra, my expression as cold and unreadable as a tombstone. I did not reach for his paperwork. Instead, I gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod to my lawyer. Mr. Vogel, who had been sitting quietly with his hands folded in front of him, finally spoke. His voice was sharp, professional, and entirely devoid of emotion. "I am afraid my client will not be signing any power of attorney today," Mr. Logan Vogel said calmly, pushing Logan's stack of papers off to the side. "However, we do have a document for you and your wife to review." Vogel opened a sleek black folder and extracted a single crisp sheet of paper. He slid it across the mahogany table until it stopped right in front of Kendra. Kendra rolled her eyes, picking it up with a dramatic sigh. "What is this, Dad? Another one of your pathetic guilt trips?" She glanced at the paper. I watched intently as her eyes scanned the bold black letters at the top of the page. The arrogant smirk vanished from her face in less than a second. Her jaw went slack and all the color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking like she had just seen a ghost. Her hands began to tremble violently. "What is it, babe?" Logan asked, his voice losing a fraction of its arrogant edge. He leaned over and snatched the paper from her shaking hands. His eyes widened. The document was an official notice of default and foreclosure sale. As you can see, Mr. Vogel continued his tone perfectly. Even the primary mortgage on your luxury estate in Oakwood Hills is severely in arrears. The bank has officially transferred the debt to a private holding company. That company has denied your request for an extension. The final deadline to settle the outstanding balance of $400,000 is tomorrow at noon. If the funds are not wired by then, the sheriff will arrive to physically evict you and the property will be seized. Logan jumped to his feet, his chair crashing backward onto the floor. "This is impossible," he shouted, his face turning a blotchy red. "We have an agreement with the bank. They said we had another 30 days. Who the hell bought our debt?" I finally broke my silence. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table, and looked my son-in-law dead in the eyes. "I did," I said, my voice low and steady. "And I want my money." Logan stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. For a fraction of a second, the room was absolutely silent. Then Logan exploded. He slammed both of his fists onto the mahogany table with such force that Mr. Vogel's coffee mug rattled against its saucer. "You arrogant old fool!" Logan spat, the veins in his neck bulging against his tight collar. "You think you can play games with me? You think buying my debt gives you leverage?" Kendra sat frozen in her chair, her eyes darting between her husband and me, completely lost in the sudden shift of power. But Logan was not finished. He reached inside his tailored jacket and pulled out a thick yellow envelope, throwing it violently onto the center of the table. He sneered, his confidence returning in an ugly, aggressive wave. "Did you really think we came here today relying entirely on your goodwill? We came prepared for your stubbornness. Go ahead, open it." Mr. Vogel reached for the envelope, but I held up my hand to stop him. I pulled the documents out myself. Printed on the crisp white letterhead of a prominent city neurologist was a comprehensive medical evaluation. The report was heavily detailed, bearing a signature I did not recognize. It concluded that I was suffering from severe, rapidly advancing dementia. The fraudulent evaluation claimed I experienced aggressive delusions, severe memory loss, and a complete inability to manage my own personal and financial affairs. Logan leaned over the table, invading my personal space. "You are going to sign the property transfer right now," he whispered, his voice laced with venom. "If you refuse, we walk straight to the authorities with this diagnosis. We will have you declared a danger to yourself. You will be stripped of your rights, thrown into a locked psychiatric ward, and heavily medicated until you forget your own name. And any financial move you made recently, including buying my mortgage, will be completely invalidated by a judge. The choice is yours, old man. Sign the deed or lose your freedom forever." I looked down at the fabricated medical report. The diagnosis was a masterful piece of fiction, undoubtedly purchased for a hefty sum from a doctor lacking any moral compass. Kendra finally found her voice, a triumphant smirk returning to her lips. "It is over, Dad," she said, crossing her arms. "Just do it the easy way." I did not argue. I did not raise my voice to defend my sanity. I simply reached into the inner breast pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out a silver fountain pen. I clicked the cap off, setting it gently on the glass surface. Kendra leaned back, her smile widening, entirely convinced she had won. Logan pushed his stack of property transfer documents toward me, tapping the signature line with a greedy finger. I ignored his paperwork. Instead, I withdrew a folded sheet of paper from my other pocket. I flattened it out, deliberately smoothing the creases with the palm of my hand. I signed my name at the very bottom with slow, elegant strokes, then slid the single sheet of paper directly over his fraudulent medical file. Logan frowned, looking down at the document. It was not a deed transfer. It was a certified financial ledger. I watched his eyes scan the rows of numbers, his pupils dilating in pure terror. He was looking at a complete forensic audit of the Apex Horizon Fund, a dummy corporation he had set up 3 years ago. "You see, Logan," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy air like a scalpel. "You mistook my silence for ignorance. You thought I was just a tired old man pushing papers at a desk. You completely forgot what I did for a living. For 30 years, I was the chief financial officer for one of the most ruthless logistics conglomerates on the entire East Coast. I spent 3 decades dismantling phantom accounts, tracking laundered money across international borders, and destroying corporate embezzlers who were 10 times smarter than you." Logan began to sweat. A single drop rolled down his pale temple. The document in front of him proved exactly $500,000 had been embezzled from his fake fund. It detailed every wire transfer, every offshore routing number, and every fake vendor he used to hide the theft. But more importantly, it listed the exact names of the underground creditors he had stolen that money from. "It took me less than a single afternoon to untangle your sloppy paper trail," I continued, leaning back in my chair. "You owe $500,000 to some extremely dangerous people in this city. People who do not send foreclosure notices. People who break kneecaps and burn houses to the ground. That document is a signed affidavit of your theft. If you do not walk out of this office and leave my property alone, I will hand-deliver this ledger to your creditors before dinner." Logan stood paralyzed, the color completely drained from his face. The paper in his hand was shaking so violently it sounded like dry leaves in the wind. Kendra looked at him, her brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "Logan, what is he talking about?" she asked, her voice tight with rising panic. "What creditors? You said our investments were secure." Logan did not answer her. He was staring at me with the wide, terrified eyes of a trapped animal. I had him entirely cornered, backed against a wall with no avenue of escape. But just as I prepared to instruct Mr. Vogel to draft their eviction notice, a sharp, piercing sound shattered the silence. It was my cell phone vibrating loudly inside my pocket. I kept my eyes locked on Logan as I answered the call. "Mr. Martin," a polite, automated voice spoke through the receiver. "We are calling from the Primary Fraud Prevention Department at your banking institution. We are officially notifying you that all of your platinum checking accounts, investment portfolios, and credit cards have been frozen effective immediately." I ended the call without a word, slipping the phone back into my pocket. My expression remained entirely neutral, but inside a cold realization began to form. Logan saw the slight shift in my posture. The terror in his eyes slowly morphed into a manic, desperate gleam. He let out a sudden, hysterical laugh that echoed off the office walls. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand and reached into his briefcase one final time. "You really are brilliant, old man," Logan panted, slamming a blue legal folder onto the table. "But you are too late. I did not just bring that medical evaluation here to scare you. I took it to a judge first thing this morning, a judge I happened to play golf with." I pulled the blue folder open. Inside was an emergency ex parte order stamped with the official seal of the county court. It was a temporary guardianship mandate. The judge had accepted the fraudulent dementia diagnosis without a hearing, declaring me in immediate danger to my own estate. As of 10 minutes ago, Logan sneered, regaining his arrogant posture. "I am your legally appointed guardian. Every bank account you own, every property deed in your name, and that private holding company you used to buy my debt is now entirely under my legal control. The bank froze your cards because I ordered them to. You have no money, you have no power, you are legally incompetent." He leaned across the table, his face inches from mine, his breath smelling of stale coffee and fear. "Your threats mean nothing. I own you now." I left Mr. Vogel's office without uttering another word. Logan's mocking laughter echoed down the polished hallway, but I let him enjoy his hollow, temporary victory. My immediate priority was securing my physical assets, specifically the heavy steel safe bolted securely beneath the floorboards of my primary residence. I climbed into my car, ignoring the relentless flashing notifications from my banking applications as they systematically locked me out of my own wealth. The drive back to the neighborhood I had lived in for 40 years was a quiet, calculated journey. I pulled onto my familiar tree-lined street expecting the quiet comfort of my brick house, but instead I found utter chaos. A large white van belonging to a commercial locksmith was parked aggressively on my front lawn, the tires sinking into the grass. The front door of my home was wide open. The heavy brass deadbolt I had installed myself had been completely drilled out, leaving jagged splinters of expensive wood scattered across the porch. And standing right in the middle of my yard, barking orders at the hired workers, was Kendra. She was holding a large black garbage bag, carelessly stuffing my late wife Cynthia's personal belongings into it. I parked my car and stepped out, the heavy thud of my cane hitting the pavement. My eyes scanned the desecrated lawn. Cynthia's favorite floral dresses, her collection of vintage jazz records, and the delicate porcelain figurines she had cherished for decades were unceremoniously dumped onto the damp grass like worthless trash. Kendra did not even stop when she saw me approaching. She simply dropped a framed photograph of Cynthia and me onto the concrete driveway, the glass shattering into a dozen sharp pieces. "You are moving to a state-funded care facility today, Dad," Kendra said, not even looking up as she callously kicked the broken frame aside with her expensive leather boot. "The estate liquidators are coming tomorrow morning to clear out all of this outdated junk. I am just getting a head start on the garbage." A weaker man would have dropped to his knees to gather his dead wife's scattered belongings. A weaker man would have screamed, cried, or begged his daughter to stop desecrating the memory of the woman who gave her life. I did none of those things. I did not even bend down to retrieve the shattered photograph resting by my shoes. Emotional outbursts are the refuge of the powerless, and despite Logan's fraudulent temporary guardianship order, I was far from powerless. I stood perfectly still on the sidewalk, my face an impenetrable mask of pure discipline. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my cell phone, and bypassed the standard emergency dispatch line. Instead, I dialed the direct personal number of Chief of Police Marcus Thorne. Marcus and I went back 20 years long before he wore a gold star on his collar. He answered on the second ring. I informed him clearly and concisely that an unauthorized break-in was occurring at my primary residence and requested his immediate presence with a squad car. Kendra paused her destructive rampage, letting out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed down the quiet street. "Go ahead and call the police, old man," she sneered, tossing another handful of Cynthia's neatly folded clothes into the dirt. "You have severe dementia. You are legally incompetent as of this morning. The police are not going to listen to a crazy person reporting a robbery at a house he no longer legally controls." I simply stared at her, maintaining my icy composure. She had absolutely no idea who she was dealing with. She thought this brick house was my only tangible asset. She thought I was just a stubborn, broke widower clinging to a single piece of aging property. What Kendra did not know, what absolutely no one in my greedy family knew, was how I had truly utilized Cynthia's massive life insurance payout 8 years ago. I did not just invest it in commercial real estate downtown. I started right here on this very street. Utilizing my decades of experience as a corporate accountant, I set up a complex network of anonymous limited liability companies. Whenever a neighbor faced foreclosure, whenever a property went up for quiet auction, my dummy corporations bought it in cash. Over the past 8 years, I had systematically purchased half the residential properties in this entire neighborhood. I was not just the owner of the house Kendra was currently vandalizing. I was the invisible landlord of the entire block. The people living in the surrounding houses, paying their rent every month, were my direct tenants. I had the power to legally evict half the street with a single stroke of my pen. I watched Kendra arrogantly tear through my home, calmly resting my hands on my cane, waiting for the sirens to arrive. Within minutes, 2 black and white patrol cars turned the corner, their flashing lights cutting through the afternoon shadows. Chief Thorne himself stepped out of the lead vehicle, his hand resting cautiously on his duty belt as he assessed the bizarre situation. He looked at the drilled lock, the scattered belongings on the lawn, the locksmith hastily packing his tools, and then finally at me. "Martin, what exactly is going on here?" the chief asked, his voice low, steady, and respectful. Before I could explain the reality of the situation, a sleek black SUV screeched to a halt right behind the patrol cars. Logan jumped out, clutching a thick manila folder, his chest heaving as if he had just run a marathon. He marched straight up to the police officers, completely ignoring my presence. "Officer, you need to remove this man from the premises immediately," Logan demanded, waving the folder aggressively in the air. Chief Thorne frowned, stepping firmly between Logan and me. "This is Mr. Martin's legal residence," Thorne stated with absolute authority. "I suggest you lower your voice, step back, and explain exactly why you are destroying his private property." Logan did not flinch. He ripped a document from the folder and shoved it directly into the chief's chest. "Not anymore. It is not," Logan sneered. "Read it carefully, Chief. That is an emergency injunction signed by Judge Harrison less than 2 hours ago. My father-in-law is suffering from severe cognitive decline. He is a documented danger to himself and others. As his legally appointed guardian, I am acting in his best financial and medical interests to secure this estate." Chief Thorne slowly unfolded the document. I watched his eyes scan the dense legal text, waiting for him to dismiss it as a fraudulent stunt. But the chief's posture slowly changed. The rigid authority in his broad shoulders sagged, and a look of genuine regret washed over his seasoned face. He folded the paper and looked at me, his eyes filled with an unspoken, painful apology. Martin Thorne said softly, his voice tight with immense frustration, "This is a valid court order. It grants your son-in-law immediate control over the physical estate pending a full psychological evaluation. And there is a strict addendum here. The judge has issued a temporary restraining order barring you from stepping foot on any disputed property to prevent you from tampering with assets." Logan crossed his arms, a triumphant, wicked grin spreading across his pale face. "You heard the chief, old man. You are legally trespassing. Get off my property." Kendra stood proudly on the porch, smirking down at me as she kicked Cynthia's favorite dress off the concrete steps. The police officers stood by, legally bound by a corrupt judge's signature, entirely unable to protect me from the theft of my own life. I was being evicted from the home I had built, the home where my wife had taken her last fragile breath. I did not argue with the police. I did not give Logan the satisfaction of a fight. I turned my back on my treacherous daughter, walked steadily to my car, and drove away, leaving my entire past behind as I prepared my next calculated move. The neon sign outside my window buzzed with a relentless, irritating hum, casting harsh red shadows across the stained walls of the cheap roadside motel. It was a far cry from the immaculate brick estate I had been exiled from just hours earlier, but it provided the absolute anonymity I required. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, staring at the blank wall, running the complex numbers of my next maneuver. At exactly 2 a.m, 2 sharp, rhythmic knocks hit the thin wooden door. I did not flinch. I knew exactly who it was. I unbolted the lock to let Mitchell inside. Mitchell was a 50-year-old private investigator, a former vice detective with a mind like a steel trap and a loyalty that could not be bought. He stepped into the cramped room, his heavy overcoat dripping from the freezing rain outside. He did not waste time with pleasantries or sympathetic looks. He pulled a folded legal document from his inner pocket and tossed it onto the flimsy nightstand. "Logan is moving significantly faster than we anticipated," Mitchell said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. That temporary guardianship order was just the beginning of his offensive. I tapped my sources inside the county courthouse. Logan and his sleazy lawyer managed to bribe a senior scheduling clerk with a thick envelope of cash. They bypassed standard legal protocol, completely expedited the docket, and pushed your permanent competency hearing forward. It has been moved up to first thing Monday morning. I looked at the document. It was a fast-tracked court notice. If the judge ruled against me on Monday, the temporary order would become permanent immediately. I would be stripped of my civil rights entirely, and Logan would gain irrevocable control over my entire legal existence. "They want to completely blindside you." Mitchell continued, pacing the narrow space between the bed and the television. "They know that if they give you time to mount a proper legal defense, their fake medical evaluation will easily fall apart under scrutiny. They need the gavel to drop before you can fight back." I listened to Mitchell outline their desperate strategy, but I felt absolutely no panic. Logan was playing a childish game of checkers while I had been orchestrating a grandmaster chess match for years. I reached into my travel bag and retrieved a small encrypted black USB drive. I held it out to Mitchell, the metallic casing glinting under the harsh motel lighting. "Take this directly to your most secure terminal," I instructed, my voice unwavering and completely devoid of fear. "Logan believes he is pulling the strings by manipulating a local corrupt judge, but he has absolutely no idea what kind of federal nightmare he has already walked into." Mitchell took the drive, weighing it in his broad palm. "What exactly is on this?" he asked. "It is a comprehensive, unredacted record of Logan's entire financial existence for the past 36 months, I explained smoothly. 3 years ago, Logan came to my house for Thanksgiving dinner bragging loudly about a new commercial development fund he was managing. I knew exactly how much he earned and how heavily he leveraged his personal credit. The numbers simply did not add up. A man who drives a leased car and carries $60,000 in credit card debt does not suddenly become a wealthy hedge fund manager overnight. Because I spent my entire career hunting down corporate fraud, I quietly started digging into his public filings. What I found was a pathetic, sloppy web of massive tax evasion, forged capital gains, and illicit money laundering. Logan had been borrowing huge sums from organized crime syndicates, running the cash through fake shell companies, and using the clean money to fund his and Kendra's lavish lifestyle. He actually thought he was a financial genius, outsmarting the system. He was actually just a useful idiot moving dirty money for violent criminals. I tracked every single wire transfer, every offshore routing number, and every falsified tax return. That USB drive contains enough hard evidence to put Logan in a federal penitentiary for the next 20 years, regardless of what happens at my competency hearing on Monday. I need you to securely leak this data to the Internal Revenue Service and the regional FBI field office by tomorrow morning. Let the federal authorities raid his office before he even steps foot inside the courthouse." Mitchell nodded, a grim smile forming on his face. He slipped the drive into his coat pocket. "Consider it done, Martin," he said, turning toward the door. "They will not know what hit them." Mitchell buttoned his heavy overcoat and slipped out the door, melting seamlessly back into the rainy night. I locked the deadbolt behind him, feeling a deep, profound sense of satisfaction. The trap was officially set. By Monday morning, Logan would be entirely too busy explaining his massive tax fraud to armed federal agents to worry about my mental state. I turned off the harsh overhead light and sat back down on the edge of the mattress, planning my next move. I needed to contact Mr. Vogel at dawn to prepare our counterfilings. But before I could even reach for my cell phone, the flimsy wooden door of my motel room exploded inward. The frame splintered violently, the deadbolt tearing through the cheap drywall with a deafening crash. 3 massive men surged into the cramped room before I could even stand up. They did not wear police uniforms or carry badges. They wore dark tactical jackets, their faces obscured by the shadows, and they moved with the terrifying coordinated efficiency of seasoned enforcers. One of them lunged forward, grabbing me by the lapels of my coat and slamming me hard against the wall. The breath left my lungs in a sharp, sudden rush. I dropped my cane, the metal clattering loudly against the linoleum floor. I did not scream for help. I knew screaming in a desolate place like this was entirely useless. "Who are you?" I demanded, forcing my voice to remain perfectly steady despite the crushing grip on my chest. The largest of the 3 men stepped forward, pulling a heavy steel firearm from his waistband and pressing the cold barrel directly against my ribs. "We are the people your pathetic son-in-law owes $500,000 to." The man growled, his breath smelling of stale tobacco and sheer violence. Logan missed his payment deadline. When we called him to collect, he told us he was completely broke, but he generously mentioned that his wealthy father-in-law was staying at a cheap motel on the edge of town. He said you had the funds to clear his massive debt and that we should come have a conversation with you instead. Logan had sold me out to the wolves to save his own skin. He had given his violent creditors my exact location, hoping they would extort the money out of me or simply eliminate his problem entirely. The man holding me against the wall struck me hard across the jaw. The room spun wildly, black spots dancing across my vision. "Get the old man in the van," the leader ordered, stepping back toward the shattered doorway. "We are going to hold him until Logan pays up, or we are going to send him back to his daughter in pieces." 2 pairs of rough hands grabbed my arms, dragging me out into the freezing rain and tossing me violently into the back of a waiting vehicle. The heavy doors slammed shut, plunging me into total darkness as the van sped away. The violent sway of the van finally ceased after what felt like an endless hour of navigating deeply rutted industrial roads. The heavy rear doors were wrenched open and rough hands dragged me out into the biting chill of an abandoned warehouse district. I was forcefully shoved into a rigid metal chair and thick abrasive ropes were bound tightly around my wrists and ankles. A single blinding halogen bulb flickered to life above me, casting harsh shadows across the cracked concrete floor. The air smelled thickly of rusted metal, old engine oil, and damp decay. The leader of the group, a massive man with a jagged scar running down his jawline, stood a few feet away. He pulled out a disposable cell phone and dialed a number, hitting the speaker button so the audio would echo through the cavernous space. The line rang twice before Logan answered. His voice sounded frantic, slightly out of breath, clearly expecting the worst. Logan, the scarred man, barked, his tone devoid of any patience. "We have your wealthy father-in-law tied to a chair in a very quiet location. You owe us $500,000. We are willing to let you off the hook if the old man transfers the funds right now. If not, we start mailing pieces of him to your front door." I sat perfectly still, waiting for Logan to panic, to beg for my life, or to frantically negotiate a payment plan. Instead, a chilling, deeply disturbing sound filled the cold warehouse. Logan was laughing. It was a dark, malicious chuckle that slowly escalated into full-blown, arrogant laughter. "Are you kidding me?" Logan sneered through the tinny speaker. "You think you are threatening me? You are doing me a massive favor. That old man is an absolute nightmare. He just froze all my accounts and threatened to expose my entire business operation. Kill him. Do it right now. Put a bullet in his head and dump his body in the river. If he dies tonight, his entire estate transfers directly to my wife, and I control her completely. I will have more than enough money to pay you back double by the end of the month. Save me the legal headache and just execute him." The scarred man looked at me, his thick eyebrows raised in genuine surprise. Even a hardened criminal was taken aback by the sheer, unadulterated coldness of my son-in-law. Logan ended the call with a sharp click, leaving the dial tone echoing in the empty room. The leader pocketed the phone and pulled a heavy tactical knife from his belt. He took a slow, deliberate step toward me, clearly expecting me to beg for mercy to Sweat or to offer him a desperate financial deal to save my own life. Instead, I looked him dead in the eyes and let out a calm, highly amused sigh. "My son-in-law is not just a traitor," I said, my voice projecting steady, unshakable authority across the concrete room. "He is also a catastrophic idiot. He does not have a single dime to his name, and if you kill me, you will never see your $500,000. But more importantly, if you kill me, the federal government will seize your entire operation by tomorrow morning." The scarred man paused, the blade hovering inches from my chest. "What are you talking about, old man?" he growled, narrowing his eyes. I did not flinch. I simply began to recite a string of numbers from memory. 4792-8814. Cayman Islands Routing Protocol. Account name, Obsidian Freight Logistics. The man froze, the color rapidly draining from his scarred face. I continued, my tone as casual as if I were reading a grocery list. 7211, Cyprus Offshore Holding. Registered under the Vanguard Management Group, a Delaware shell company you use to wash the dirty cash Logan hands you every quarter. I saw your entire ledger. When I audited Logan's fake hedge fund, I did not just stop at his sloppy local transactions. I followed the money all the way to the top. I tracked your international wire transfers. I mapped your corporate structure. And because I have spent the last 8 years building a massive anonymous real estate empire, I had the capital to make a very strategic purchase. I did not just buy Logan's mortgage. Through a proxy firm, I quietly purchased the controlling shares of Vanguard Management Group. I am the silent majority owner of the shell company that cleans your money. The three men stared at me in stunned, absolute silence. "You are the muscle," I told the leader smoothly, "but you answer to a boss. If I do not enter a highly specific encrypted alphanumeric password into my private server every 24 hours, a dead man's switch will automatically trigger. A comprehensive, unredacted financial dossier containing every routing number, every fake vendor, and every illicit transaction your syndicate has made over the past 5 years will be emailed directly to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Your boss's entire empire will be frozen and dismantled before my body is even cold. So I suggest you put that knife away and untie me right now." The scarred man stared at me, his breathing heavy as his mind raced to calculate the immense risk. He did not need to verify the threat. The exact sequence of the offshore routing numbers I had just recited was proof enough that I held their entire operation in the palm of my hand. He slowly lowered the tactical knife. Without saying another word, he stepped behind my chair and sliced through the thick, abrasive ropes binding my wrists and ankles. I stood up slowly, brushing the dust from my tailored coat, projecting an aura of absolute, untouchable power. "I deeply apologize for the rough treatment," Mr. Martin, the leader, said, his voice completely stripped of its previous hostility. He was now speaking to me not as a hostage, but as a high-ranking superior. We were acting on extremely bad information from Logan. We had absolutely no idea who you truly were or what you controlled. Let me arrange a secure vehicle to escort you safely back to the city immediately. Can I offer you anything before you go? A drink, some lunch. I adjusted my cuffs and retrieved my fallen cane from the concrete floor. No thank you, I replied coldly. Just ensure Logan understands that his debt has not been forgiven. I will deal with him on my own terms. The men practically bowed as they led me toward the heavy rolling doors of the warehouse. They slid the massive metal barrier open, revealing the gray, overcast afternoon outside. I took a deep breath of the crisp air, fully prepared to contact Mr. Vogel and execute the total destruction of Logan's life. But the moment I stepped over the threshold, a blinding pair of headlights flicked on, illuminating the loading dock. It was not a taxi or a secure transport vehicle. It was a private heavy-duty medical ambulance. Before I could even register the threat, two massive orderlies wearing clinical white uniforms lunged from the shadows. They tackled me hard against the brick side of the building, pinning my arms behind my back with terrifying speed and precision. The gangsters stepped back, confused but completely unwilling to interfere with what looked like an official medical seizure. From the passenger seat of the ambulance, Kendra stepped out. She held the blue folder containing the fraudulent guardianship order high in the air. She had used the emergency injunction to legally ping my cell phone's GPS location. I told you, Dad, Kendra sneered, her eyes gleaming with wicked, unadulterated triumph. You are a severe danger to yourself. You are wandering around abandoned industrial warehouses in a state of severe dementia. You need serious medical help. I opened my mouth to shout commands to the gangsters to leverage my newly established power, but I never got the chance. One of the orderlies forcefully pinned my neck against the cold brick, and I felt the sharp, icy prick of a large hypodermic needle driving deep into my muscle. A heavy chemical heat flooded my veins instantly. My vision blurred, Kendra's smug, smiling face distorting into a dark shadow as my legs gave out completely, and everything faded into a suffocating, silent black void. I slowly regained consciousness to the harsh, blinding glare of fluorescent lights. The heavy chemical fog in my brain made the sterile white walls of the psychiatric hold spin wildly. I was strapped to a narrow hospital bed wearing a scratchy institutional gown. My wrists were not restrained, but my body felt like it was encased in solid lead. Before I could fully orient myself, the heavy metal door clicked open. A tall, sharply dressed man with a stethoscope draped casually over his expensive silk tie walked into the room. His name badge read, Dr. Croft, Chief of Psychiatry. He did not look at me with the compassionate gaze of a medical professional. He looked at me like a highly profitable business transaction. He pulled a small plastic cup from his pocket, shaking 3 heavy unmarked blue pills inside it. He did not bother with pleasantries. He poured a glass of water and set it forcefully on the rolling tray next to my bed. Your son-in-law has authorized a highly aggressive treatment plan for your rapidly deteriorating mental state, Dr. Croft stated, his voice dripping with absolute clinical detachment. These sedatives will ensure you remain perfectly calm and highly compliant for your permanent competency hearing on Monday morning. Logan pays extremely well for premium care, and we are going to make sure you look exactly like the severely demented patient he described to the judge. Swallow them now, or I will have the orderlies hold you down and administer them intravenously. I looked into his greedy, corrupt eyes. I knew exactly what those pills were. They were heavy antipsychotics designed to strip a man of his coherence, turning a brilliant mind into a drooling, unresponsive shell. Logan was ensuring that when the judge saw me, I would physically match the fraudulent diagnosis. I reached out with a trembling, sluggish hand, fully playing the part of the broken old man. I placed the pills in my mouth, took a large gulp of water and swallowed audibly. Dr. Croft inspected my empty mouth with a satisfied smirk, nodded once, and walked out of the room, locking the heavy door behind him. The absolute second the deadbolt clicked into place, I turned my head and spat the 3 blue pills into my hand. I had tucked them deep into the pocket of my cheek, a survival trick I had learned decades ago. I wrapped the dissolving toxic capsules in a tissue and shoved them deep inside the mattress lining. The chemical haze from the initial injection was slowly fading, and my sharp analytical mind was rapidly regaining its focus. I was locked in a high-security psychiatric ward, completely isolated from Mitchell Vogel and my entire financial empire. But I was not without allies. 3 hours later, the night shift began. The door opened quietly, and a young African-American nurse stepped into the dim room. She carried a clipboard and a blood pressure cuff, moving with practiced efficiency. She closed the door softly behind her, making sure the electronic lock engaged. She walked up to my bed, her eyes darting toward the surveillance camera in the corner, noting its blind spot. She leaned in close, pretending to adjust my vitals monitor. Her name was Camille. She was 30 years old, a highly respected charge nurse, and someone who owed her entire medical career to me. 8 years ago, when I began quietly buying up real estate, I also established a completely anonymous educational trust for underprivileged minority students in my community. I poured hundreds of thousands of dollars into paying full university tuitions for brilliant young minds who just needed a chance. Camille was my very first recipient. She had tracked down the anonymous donor years ago, but kept my secret out of profound respect. She pressed a cold, heavy object into the palm of my hand beneath the thin hospital blanket. It was a fully charged, disposable cell phone. Mr. Martin, Camille whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the heart monitor. I saw your name on the intake registry and I intercepted your chart. Dr. Croft marked you as highly aggressive and restricted all outside communication. I know he is on Logan's payroll. I know this entire admission is completely fraudulent. You have exactly 72 hours before the judge officially reviews your file. Tell me exactly what you need me to do, and I will do it. I gripped the phone tightly, feeling a massive surge of adrenaline. I thanked her with a single respectful nod. I did not need her to break me out. I needed her to be my eyes and ears inside this corrupt facility. She adjusted my blanket, gave me a reassuring look, and quietly exited the room. I waited until the midnight rounds were completely over before dialing my lawyer's secure line. Vogel answered on the first ring, his voice sharp and laced with unprecedented urgency. Martin Vogel said, skipping the formalities entirely. We have a catastrophic situation on our hands. Logan and Kendra are not just waiting for the Monday hearing. They are completely liquidating your tangible assets while you are locked inside that facility. Logan used his temporary guardianship order to convince the judge that you require specialized around-the-clock neurological care that your liquid accounts cannot cover due to the bank freeze. The corrupt judge just granted Kendra an emergency motion to auction off your primary residence to raise the necessary medical funds. My blood ran completely cold. Kendra was auctioning my house. Not next month. Not next week. Right now, Vogel continued the frantic typing of his keyboard, echoing through the receiver. They have listed the brick estate on a fast-tracked 24-hour private real estate auction. It is set to close tomorrow afternoon. They are accepting cash offers only, and they have already priced it aggressively below market value to ensure an immediate sale. The moment the gavel drops, the new buyer takes immediate possession, and Kendra gets a massive, untraceable cash payout. This was not just about Kendra stealing my property to fund Logan's debts. This was a direct, fatal threat to my entire counteroffensive. What Kendra and Logan did not know was that the brick house was not just a home. It was my physical vault. Hidden directly beneath the oak floorboards of the master bedroom was a custom-built fireproof floor safe. Inside that safe were the original unredacted hard copies of Logan's fraudulent loan signatures, the indisputable proof of Kendra's medical theft 8 years ago, and the master physical ledger detailing every single shell company I controlled. If that house was sold and handed over to a private buyer tomorrow, those floorboards would be torn up by renovators. The safe would be discovered, the evidence would be destroyed, and I would lose the ultimate leverage I needed to completely annihilate them in court. I could not let that house fall into anyone else's hands. I sat up in the hospital bed, the cold determination settling deep into my bones. Vogel, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. Contact Mitchell immediately. Tell him to liquidate the offshore reserve accounts. I do not care what the penalty fees are. We are going to enter that private auction tomorrow. If Kendra wants to sell my house for cash, we are going to buy it right out from under her. The private auction house downtown was a temple of modern greed. High ceilings, polished marble floors, and crystal chandeliers set the stage for wealthy predators to pick apart the remnants of broken lives. Kendra and Logan stood at the back of the sleek viewing gallery, sipping expensive champagne from delicate flutes. Logan wore a smug, self-satisfied grin, his heavy debts momentarily forgotten in the intoxicating rush of impending wealth. Kendra leaned against his shoulder, her eyes fixed hungrily on the digital display screen above the auctioneer's podium. An image of my brick home, the sanctuary where I had raised her and loved her mother, flashed onto the screen. The auctioneer, a sharp man in a crisp tuxedo, cleared his throat and announced the property. Because Logan had fast-tracked the sale through his fraudulent guardianship order, the starting bid was listed at a staggering 50% below market value. They wanted a quick, untraceable cash sale to satisfy Logan's dangerous creditors before the weekend. A few local real estate flippers raised their numbered paddles, offering low-ball bids, hoping to score a cheap investment. Logan gripped his champagne flute tightly, his knuckles turning white as the numbers slowly ticked upward. He needed a specific amount to clear his massive syndicate debt. Just as the auctioneer prepared to call out the final warning, a man in a sharp gray suit sitting in the very back row raised his paddle. He did not just outbid the room. He spoke with a loud, unwavering voice, offering exactly double the current market value of the entire estate in a single, unassailable cash bid. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Kendra gasped, spilling a few drops of champagne onto her designer dress. Logan's eyes widened to the size of saucers, and he let out a loud, victorious bark of laughter. They clinked their glasses together in a toast, entirely convinced they had just hit the ultimate jackpot. They thought a foolish, overly eager corporate buyer had just solved all of their financial nightmares in a matter of seconds. They had absolutely no idea they were celebrating their own complete destruction. Miles away from the polished marble of the auction house, I sat on the edge of my narrow hospital bed inside the locked psychiatric ward. I held the disposable cell phone tightly to my ear, listening to the steady, rhythmic typing of Mr. Vogel's keyboard on the other end of the line. The proxy bidder just secured the winning bid. Vogel reported, his voice vibrating with intense satisfaction. The auctioneer has officially dropped the gavel. We hold the exclusive right to purchase. Execute the wire transfers immediately. I commanded, my voice cold and absolute. I watched the second hand on the cheap plastic wall clock tick forward. Using the encrypted financial infrastructure I had built over the last 8 years, I authorized Mitchell to move the necessary capital. The funds did not come from my frozen domestic accounts. They originated from the Cayman Islands routing protocol I had recited to the gangsters just 24 hours earlier. The money moved like a ghost through the international banking system, washing cleanly through the Delaware Shell Company before landing securely in the auction house escrow account. The cash transaction was entirely flawless, legally binding, and completely untraceable to my personal name. The brick estate was secure. The hidden floor safe containing their ultimate ruin remained completely untouched. With the financial maneuver successfully executed, it was time for my physical departure. A soft knock echoed against the heavy metal door. Camille, the loyal charge nurse, quickly stepped into the room holding a large garment bag she had smuggled in through the loading dock. "Mitchell dropped this off for you 10 minutes ago," Camille whispered, unzipping the bag to reveal a perfectly tailored charcoal wool suit, a crisp white shirt, and a polished silver tie. She handed me my leather dress shoes and a fresh, secure smartphone. "Dr. Croft is currently being detained in his office by your legal team," Camille continued with a brilliant, defiant smile. Mr. Vogel marched in with a federal injunction and 2 armed court-martials. They served the corrupt doctor with a massive malpractice lawsuit and suspended his medical license pending a federal review. "Your fraudulent psychiatric hold has been entirely invalidated by a superior court judge. You are officially a free man, Mr. Martin." I stood up from the sterile hospital bed, shedding the demeaning paper gown. I dressed quickly, feeling the familiar heavy armor of my tailored suit settling onto my shoulders. I tightened my tie, slid my gold watch onto my wrist, and gripped my wooden cane. I was no longer the helpless, demented old man they had locked away. I was a man returning to reclaim his kingdom. I thanked Camille with a firm handshake and walked straight out the front doors of the psychiatric facility, stepping into the waiting black luxury sedan Mitchell had parked by the curb. Back at the auction house, Kendra and Logan were quickly ushered into a private soundproof closing room to finalize the paperwork. They sat across a wide glass table from the proxy bidder, a stoic corporate lawyer who represented my hidden interests. Logan was practically vibrating with greed, his pen hovering eagerly over the signature line of the transfer documents. "Let us wrap this up," Logan demanded, tapping his pen impatiently against the glass. "Wire the funds to my designated guardianship account, and the keys are yours." Kendra leaned forward, a triumphant, arrogant smirk plastered across her face. Out of pure ego, she could not resist asking a question. "By the way, who exactly is your client?" she asked the proxy, crossing her arms. "We like to know which foolish development firm is willing to pay double the asking price for a teardown property in that neighborhood." The proxy bidder did not smile. He simply reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out the finalized stamped articles of incorporation. He slid the heavy document across the glass table until it rested directly in front of Kendra. "The purchasing entity is listed right there, ma'am," the proxy stated in a flat, monotone voice. Kendra rolled her eyes and looked down at the official paperwork. I had specifically instructed Vogel to ensure the legal name of the holding company was printed in bold, unmissable capital letters at the very top of the contract. Kendra read the words, "Cynthia's Revenge, LLC." The arrogant smirk vanished from her face instantly. Her entire body went rigid and her breath hitched sharply in her throat. Her eyes darted wildly across the page, reading the name of her dead mother over and over again as the horrifying reality began to set in. Logan noticed her sudden paralysis. "What is it?" he snapped, snatching the paper from her trembling hands. Before Logan could even process the words on the page, the heavy oak doors of the private closing room swung open with a resounding, authoritative crash. I stepped over the threshold, my polished leather shoes clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I wore my tailored charcoal suit, my posture perfectly straight, projecting an aura of absolute terrifying power. I did not look like a man suffering from dementia. I looked like the executioner they had unknowingly summoned. The color drained completely from Logan's face, his jaw dropping open in utter disbelief. Kendra let out a short, choked gasp, pressing her hands against her mouth as she stared at me like a ghost risen from the grave. "You are supposed to be locked in a ward," Logan stammered, his voice cracking with sheer panic. I walked slowly to the head of the glass table, resting both hands on the silver handle of my cane. I looked down at the two pathetic, greedy creatures who had tried to steal my life. "I was discharged," I said, my voice echoing through the quiet room like thunder. "And I believe you are sitting at my closing table. Proceed with the transfer. I am buying my house back." Logan stared at me as if the polished hardwood floor had just opened up to swallow him whole. The sheer impossibility of my presence in that auction room short-circuited his brain. He took a stumbling step backward, knocking his heavy leather chair into the wall. Then the initial shock morphed into a wild, frantic rage. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out his cell phone, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped it onto the glass table. "You are not buying anything!" Logan screamed, spittle flying from his lips as he frantically punched numbers into the keypad. "You are a legally certified lunatic who just broke out of a secure medical lockdown. You belong in a padded room." I stood completely motionless, watching him dial the emergency dispatch line with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a desperate rat in a maze. Kendra remained frozen beside him, her eyes wide with a sickening realization that the massive cash payout she had been celebrating just moments ago was entirely a mirage. "Yes, I need police dispatch immediately," Logan shouted into the phone, his voice echoing loudly in the soundproof closing room. "I am at the downtown private auction house. I have a highly dangerous, severely demented psychiatric patient who just escaped from a locked facility. He is aggressively threatening my wife and me. Send a squad car and medical personnel right now. I have his legal guardianship paperwork in my hand." He ended the call and slammed the phone onto the table, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at my chest. "You just made the biggest mistake of your pathetic life, old man. I am going to have you strapped to a gurney and pumped so full of sedatives you will not be able to form a complete sentence for the rest of your miserable life." The proxy lawyer sitting across the table simply adjusted his glasses, completely unfazed by Logan's violent outburst, and calmly continued organizing the transfer documents. I did not raise my voice. I did not move to stop him. I rested both hands firmly on the silver handle of my cane and stared him down. "Call whoever you want, Logan," I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register. "You are about to discover that a piece of paper signed by a bribed local judge is entirely worthless when you are standing in the crosshairs of the federal government." Less than 10 minutes later, the wail of police sirens pierced the quiet atmosphere of the auction house. Heavy boots pounded down the marble corridor, and the heavy oak doors of the closing room were thrown open. 3 local police officers entered the room, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. Right behind them, breathing heavily and adjusting his expensive silk tie, was Dr. Croft. Logan had clearly alerted the facility the moment he saw me, and the corrupt psychiatrist had rushed over to secure his highly profitable prisoner. "Officers, detain that man immediately," Dr. Croft demanded, pointing directly at me with a false air of medical authority. "He is under a mandatory psychiatric hold and requires immediate institutionalization." One of the officers stepped forward, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. but before he could even cross the room, a sharp, commanding voice cut through the tension. "Stand down, officer, unless you want to spend the remainder of your career directing traffic." Mr. Vogel stepped into the room flanking the police officers. He was not alone. Two stoic men wearing dark suits and federal marshal badges walked in right beside him. Vogel strode directly to the glass table, opened his sleek briefcase, and slapped a thick, heavily stamped document right in front of the local police. "That is a comprehensive neurological competency certification," Vogel announced, his voice ringing with absolute undeniable authority. "It was conducted by a panel of 3 independent federally appointed psychiatrists less than 24 hours ago. It definitively concludes that Mr. Martin is in perfect cognitive health. The local emergency injunction you are holding is hereby superseded and entirely nullified by federal mandate." Logan grabbed the document, his eyes scanning the bold federal seals in pure, unadulterated panic. "Doctor." Croft turned pale, instinctively taking a step toward the exit. "This is a forgery," Dr. Croft stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "I personally diagnosed this man with advanced dementia. You diagnosed him with whatever this fraud paid you to diagnose him with," I replied, stepping forward and leveling my gaze at the corrupt doctor. Vogel reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a stack of high-resolution photographs and bank records. Camille, the brilliant charge nurse whose career I had funded, had not just smuggled me a phone. She had used her administrative access to quietly audit Dr. Croft's private terminal while he was sleeping. Here we have a detailed digital ledger of a $50,000 offshore wire transfer moving directly from Logan's dummy corporation into Dr. Croft's private Cayman Islands account, Vogel stated, sliding the evidence across the table for the police to see. "And we have time-stamped security footage of Dr. Croft attempting to alter Mr. Martin's medical charts to justify a heavy, unprescribed chemical sedation." The room fell into a suffocating, absolute silence. The local police officers looked at the federal marshals, then at the undeniable financial evidence sitting on the glass table. One of the marshals stepped forward, pulling a set of heavy steel cuffs from his belt. "Dr. Croft, you are under arrest for profound medical malpractice, extortion, and federal wire fraud," the marshal stated in a flat, clinical tone. The corrupt doctor let out a pathetic whimper as his arms were forcefully wrenched behind his back and the cuffs snapped shut. He did not even look at Logan as he was marched out of the room in total disgrace. Kendra collapsed into one of the leather chairs, burying her face in her trembling hands. The temporary guardianship had been legally shattered. My absolute autonomy was officially restored. Logan stood frozen, staring at the empty doorway where his purchased medical professional had just been hauled away. He was completely out of moves. The police officers tipped their hats to me and quietly exited the room, leaving Logan and Kendra entirely defenseless. I picked up my silver fountain pen, signed the final transfer document to repurchase my own home, and handed it to the proxy lawyer. "The game is over, Logan," I said, turning my back on him. "Gather your treacherous wife and get out of my sight before I decide to have you arrested for the money you stole from your underground creditors." But instead of begging for mercy, Logan began to laugh. It was not a nervous chuckle. It was a dark, guttural sound that scraped against the walls of the silent room. He reached into his briefcase one final time, his hands no longer shaking. "You think you beat me because you broke the guardianship?" Logan sneered, his eyes burning with a reckless, psychotic desperation. "You think you are so smart because you outmaneuvered a greedy doctor?" He pulled a thick, notarized contract from his bag and slammed it onto the glass table. The heavy thud echoed like a gunshot. "You forgot one tiny, crucial detail, old man. For the past 72 hours, I was your legally appointed guardian. I had absolute, unmitigated control over every single asset bearing your name." I looked down at the contract. It was a commercial lien. Logan grinned, his teeth bared like a cornered wolf. "Yesterday afternoon, while you were locked in that hospital bed, I took the original corporate charter of your massive real estate holding company and I used my guardianship power to mortgage the entire entity. I collateralized every single property you own against a massive high-interest loan from a predatory junk fund operating out of Nevada. I wired the liquid cash directly to my creditors to save my own life. If you do not pay back a staggering $5 million to that junk fund by the end of the month, they will legally seize your entire empire. You might have your freedom back, Martin, but you are completely bankrupt." Logan did not hesitate. He delivered his final arrogant threat regarding the massive Nevada junk fund loan and immediately turned on his heel. He grabbed his leather briefcase, nearly ripping the handle off in his frantic haste, and practically sprinted out of the soundproof closing room. He knew the federal authorities were likely already seizing his domestic assets due to the massive tax evasion I had exposed, and he was clearly determined to board the first available flight out of the jurisdiction. He left his wife completely defenseless in his wake, abandoning her without a second thought. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind him, sealing Kendra inside with Mr. Vogel, the proxy lawyer, and me. The silence in the room was deafening. Kendra stared at the closed doors, her eyes wide with the horrifying realization that her husband had just abandoned her to face the catastrophic financial consequences entirely alone. She looked back at me, her rigid posture completely crumbling. The arrogant, untouchable woman who had mercilessly thrown her mother's personal belongings onto the wet grass just 24 hours ago was instantly gone. In her place was a master manipulator executing a desperate, highly calculated pivot. Kendra slumped out of her heavy leather chair and dropped to her knees on the polished marble floor. Genuine tears began to stream down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "Dad, please," she sobbed, her voice cracking with manufactured fragility. "You have to believe me. I had absolutely no idea Logan was going to do any of this. He lied to me. He manipulated me into signing those guardianship papers. He has been financially and emotionally controlling me for years, threatening to ruin me if I did not blindly go along with his schemes. I am a victim here, Dad. I am still your little girl. You have to protect me from him. Please do not leave me to drown in his mess." She clasped her hands together, looking up at me with wide, pleading eyes. She played the role of the terrified, battered wife to absolute perfection. For a fleeting, dangerous fraction of a second, the protective instinct of a father flickered deep inside my chest. Despite the 8 years of silence, despite the horrific lies she had spread about me, a tiny, foolish part of my heart wanted to reach down and lift my daughter off the cold floor. But as Kendra leaned forward, frantically pleading for my financial salvation, the collar of her designer silk blouse shifted slightly. A delicate vintage platinum chain slipped out from beneath the expensive fabric, catching the bright, piercing light of the crystal chandelier above us. Suspended at the center of the chain was a unique teardrop-cut diamond surrounded by tiny emeralds. My blood instantly turned to solid ice. My breathing stopped entirely. I recognized that necklace immediately. It was not a piece of jewelry Logan had bought her with his dirty money. It was a highly specific custom piece I had commissioned for Cynthia on our 20th wedding anniversary. The memory of that necklace hit me with the devastating force of a freight train, transporting me back 8 years to the absolute darkest week of my entire life. Cynthia was lying in her sterile hospice bed, her body severely ravaged by the final stages of aggressive cancer. The rhythmic, agonizing beep of her heart monitor filled the small room. In her final hours, Cynthia had become highly agitated, her frail hands weakly grasping at her bare collarbone. She kept whispering, begging for her anniversary necklace. She wanted to hold it one last time, to feel the physical weight of our shared history and love before she passed away. I had frantically torn our entire house apart looking for it. I emptied every jewelry box, checked every drawer, and scoured every bag we had brought to the hospice facility. I thought it had been misplaced in the chaotic rush of medical transfers. I had to sit beside my dying wife, holding her trembling hand, and tearfully apologize because I could not find the one item that brought her comfort in her final terrifying moments. But it was not lost. It was stolen. Looking down at the platinum chain resting proudly against Kendra's chest, the horrifying, undeniable truth snapped into place. 8 years ago, while I was downstairs speaking with the hospice doctors, Kendra had been left alone in the room with her dying mother. She had not been holding Cynthia's hand. She had been unhooking the clasp of that diamond necklace right off her dying mother's neck. The sheer, unfathomable depravity required to steal a piece of jewelry from a frail woman drawing her final, agonizing breaths was a level of wickedness beyond human comprehension. Any lingering trace of paternal pity, any microscopic fragment of warmth I still held for my daughter evaporated instantly. The fire in my chest died, replaced by a dark, unbreakable, and absolute resolve. The woman kneeling in front of me was not my little girl. She was a ruthless parasite. "Get up off the floor, Kendra," I commanded. My voice did not yell. It was flat dead and entirely devoid of human empathy. Kendra hesitated, her fake tears pausing as she registered the absolute zero temperature of my tone. She slowly pushed herself up, brushing the dust from her skirt, her lower lip still trembling in a pathetic attempt to maintain the charade. "I will not save you. I stated clearly, locking my eyes onto hers. You are exactly where you deserve to be. You chained yourself to a sinking ship out of pure, unadulterated greed, and now you are going to drown with it. I will not pay a single cent to shield you from the consequences of your own treacherous actions. You are completely on your own. Kendra stared at me. She looked deep into my eyes and realized with terrifying certainty that the emotional manipulation had entirely failed. The tears instantly stopped falling. The fragile, trembling posture vanished without a trace. The victim mask slipped completely off, revealing the ugly, venomous monster lurking beneath. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, vicious hatred. Her hands clenched into tight fists at her sides. "If you do not give me the money to survive this old man, I will destroy you," Kendra hissed, her voice dropping into a venomous, calculating snarl. "I will not just walk away quietly and let you win. I will go straight to the local press. I will contact every major news station in this city and tell them exactly what kind of monster you really are. I will sit in front of the cameras and cry on national television. I will tell them that you were a violent, controlling domestic abuser. I will say that you beat my mother for decades, that you physically abused me throughout my entire childhood, and that you used your dirty, anonymous real estate money to silence us and buy off the local police. I will paint you as a ruthless tyrant who drove his own wife to an early grave and who then maliciously locked his only daughter out of her rightful inheritance. Society loves a tragic, weeping victim, Dad, especially when the villain is a wealthy, unfeeling corporate landlord. They will devour every single lying word I say. I will completely obliterate your reputation. I will make sure the public backlash forces every commercial tenant you have to break their leases. I will watch your entire empire burn to the ground in the court of public opinion. Give me $2 million right now to start my life over, or I will ensure your name is synonymous with pure evil by tomorrow morning." Logan had not fled to the airport as I initially suspected. A man crippled by a lifetime of arrogant delusion rarely knows when to accept total defeat. Instead of running, Logan had driven his least luxury SUV straight to the one place he felt entirely untouchable. The Fairview Valley Country Club was a sanctuary for the city elite, a sprawling estate of manicured greens and exclusive dining terraces, where generational wealth shielded predators from the consequences of the real world. I stood perfectly still just inside the French doors of the dining patio, watching him from a distance. Logan was seated at a prime table under a massive canvas umbrella, aggressively pitching two older, affluent investors. He was sweating heavily through his expensive designer dress shirt, rapidly downing his second glass of premium scotch, but his mouth was moving a mile a minute. I could hear his desperate lies carrying over the gentle clinking of fine silverware and the soft murmur of the wealthy patrons. He was bragging loudly about a massive, imminent real estate acquisition. He spun a beautiful, entirely fictional tale about how his aging father-in-law was stepping down due to rapidly declining health, proudly announcing that he was officially taking over a commercial empire worth tens of millions of dollars. He slid a glossy investment prospectus across the crisp white linen tablecloth, practically begging the two men to sign a capital injection agreement. He told them it was a highly exclusive ground floor opportunity that would guarantee a massive return on their investment. In reality, he was frantically trying to swindle enough liquid cash to buy himself a private jet ticket out of federal jurisdiction before the authorities raided his office. He raised his glass to make a toast, his fake smile stretched so wide it looked like it might tear his face in half. He was completely oblivious to the fact that his entire world was about to violently collapse right on top of his expensive lunch. I gripped the silver handle of my cane and walked purposefully onto the sunlit terrace. I did not rush my steps, and I did not raise my voice to cause an undignified scene. I simply approached his table, my polished leather shoes silent on the heated stone patio. "Excuse me, gentlemen," I said, my voice cutting through the warm afternoon air with absolute freezing authority. "I deeply hope I am not interrupting a lucrative business transaction." The two older investors looked up in mild confusion, annoyed by the sudden interruption. Logan froze instantly, his crystal Scotch glass halting halfway to his mouth. The fake, arrogant smile instantly melted off his sweating face, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated horror. He tried to speak, to formulate a lie, but his vocal cords simply refused to function. I did not wait for an invitation to join them. I pulled a thick, heavy leather-bound folder from inside my tailored coat and dropped it directly onto the center of their table, right on top of his fraudulent investment prospectus. The heavy thud made the crystal glasses rattle and spilled a drop of expensive wine onto the linen. I turned my attention fully to the two investors. "My name is Martin," I stated, clearly maintaining direct, unwavering eye contact with both men. "I am the wealthy father-in-law this man was just discussing. I am in perfect cognitive and physical health, and I am the sole, indisputable owner of the real estate empire he is currently attempting to leverage. I highly advise you to keep your checkbooks closed today, unless you are in the business of funding federal fugitives." Logan scrambled to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the stone patio. "You have no right to be here," Logan hissed, his voice cracking with sheer panic and desperation. He reached his trembling hand forward to grab the folder, but I slammed the heavy rubber tip of my cane down onto the leather cover, pinning it firmly to the table. "You told me you took out a $5 million loan from a predatory junk fund in Nevada," I said, looking at Logan with a predatory calm. "You bragged that you collateralized my entire holding company to pay off your underground syndicate creditors. You thought you had trapped me in an inescapable financial corner. But you made one fatal miscalculation, Logan. A man who builds an anonymous real estate empire over 8 years does not leave his corporate structure vulnerable to a single point of failure. When my lawyer discovered your fraudulent lien, he did not just file a legal dispute in court. He contacted the Nevada Junk Fund directly. I opened the folder revealing the freshly stamped acquisition contracts featuring my authorized signatures. I bought your debt, Logan. I bought the commercial lien for pennies on the dollar using my offshore cash reserves. I am not just your father-in-law anymore. I am your sole, ultimate creditor. You owe me $5 million and the entire note is due today." The two investors did not need to hear another single word. They were seasoned businessmen who instantly recognized the undeniable stench of catastrophic financial ruin. They stood up immediately, gathering their briefcases and completely ignoring Logan's frantic, pathetic pleas for them to stay. They walked away from the table in absolute disgust, leaving Logan standing alone and completely exposed. His fraudulent facade was entirely stripped away, but his humiliation was not yet complete. The general manager of the country club, a stern man impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, marched onto the terrace accompanied by 2 burly private security guards. The manager did not offer a polite greeting or a respectful nod. Mr. Logan, the manager, announced his voice, carrying just enough volume to attract the attention of the surrounding elite tables. "Our accounting department was just notified by your banking institution that your platinum membership accounts have been federally frozen due to severe fraud investigations. Furthermore, your primary credit card just declined the payment for your lunch. Your membership is hereby permanently revoked. I must ask you to vacate the premises immediately, or my security team will forcefully remove you for criminal trespassing." Logan looked wildly around the patio. Dozens of wealthy patrons were staring directly at him, whispering behind their hands, actively watching his spectacular public downfall. His fragile ego, the only thing he truly valued in his miserable life, shattered into a million jagged pieces. The realization that he had absolutely nothing left completely broke his mind. He let out a feral, guttural scream of pure rage. He lunged across the dining table, sending crystal glasses crashing to the floor, his hands outstretched and aiming directly for my throat with pure, murderous intent. I did not flinch. I did not even take a single step back. Before Logan could even clear the linen tablecloth, a massive shadow stepped out from behind the decorative marble pillar to my right. It was Mitchell. My private investigator moved with the terrifying explosive speed of a seasoned street enforcer. He intercepted Logan mid-air, gripping him by the lapels of his expensive shirt, and slammed him brutally down onto the hard stone patio. Logan gasped for air as the breath was knocked from his lungs, but Mitchell was not finished. He grabbed Logan's right wrist, planted his heavy boot firmly against Logan's shoulder blade, and twisted the arm backward with a sickening, violent jerk. A loud, sharp crack echoed across the silent terrace. Logan shrieked in absolute agony, his face pressing against the cold stone as his broken arm hung at a grotesque, unnatural angle. Mitchell stepped back, casually adjusting his coat, leaving the treacherous coward writhing and sobbing pathetically on the ground. I looked down at the broken man who had tried to steal my life, feeling absolutely zero pity in my heart. "Send the bill for his lunch to his collection agency," I told the manager smoothly. I turned my back on Logan's agonized screams, gripped my cane, and walked off the sunlit terrace with my head held high. Logan did not go to a hospital to set his broken arm. Fueled by blinding panic and the sheer adrenaline of a cornered prey, he drove his leased luxury vehicle erratically back to his sprawling suburban estate. He gripped the steering wheel with his one functioning hand, his breathing ragged, his mind consumed by a single desperate objective. He needed untraceable cash, and he needed it immediately to secure a private flight out of federal jurisdiction. He kicked the heavy oak front door of his home open, ignoring the sharp spikes of agony shooting up his shattered arm. He bypassed the empty wall safes he already knew about and marched straight up the sweeping mahogany staircase toward Kendra's lavish master suite. He knew his wife. He knew she was just as calculating and self-serving as he was. A woman like Kendra never tied her entire survival to one sinking ship. She always kept a life raft. Logan tore through her massive walk-in closet like a feral animal. He used his good arm to sweep rows of expensive silk dresses and designer handbags onto the floor. He smashed the custom shelving units, desperately searching for a hidden compartment. Near the back of the closet, beneath a display of velvet shoeboxes, he noticed a subtle seam in the polished cedar floorboards. He grabbed a heavy brass lamp from the bedside table and repeatedly smashed the base against the wood until the floorboard cracked and splintered apart. Beneath the ruined wood was a sleek, fireproof lockbox. Logan shattered the digital keypad with the brass lamp, prying the bent lid open. He stared inside, his breath catching in his throat. Neatly stacked inside the box were thick, bound bundles of $100 bills accompanied by a heavy velvet pouch overflowing with untraceable conflict diamonds and heavy gold bullion. It was easily $250,000 in liquid assets. Kendra had been quietly siphoning off his illicit profits for years, hoarding a massive secret slush fund while he was desperately dodging violent syndicate enforcers. A sickening wave of betrayal washed over him completely, overriding his physical pain. Less than a single block away, I sat in the passenger seat of my discreet black sedan. The engine was turned off, and the tinted windows completely concealed my presence in the quiet suburban neighborhood. Mitchell sat in the driver's seat, carefully adjusting the frequency dials on a highly advanced digital audio receiver. Weeks ago, while Kendra and Logan were out spending my supposedly stolen money, Mitchell had effortlessly bypassed their security system and planted microscopic listening devices in every primary room of their estate. I wore a small earpiece, listening with absolute chilling clarity as the chaotic scene unfolded inside the house. I heard the unmistakable sound of the front door slamming open, the frantic footsteps rushing up the stairs, and the violent crashing of furniture being destroyed in the master bedroom. A few minutes later, I heard the sharp, unmistakable click of Kendra's high heels rushing up the hardwood stairs. She had taken a taxi straight from the auction house, completely unaware that her husband had beaten her home. The audio feed crackled as she entered the destroyed closet. Her initial gasp of shock instantly morphed into a shrieking, venomous scream. I listened as my daughter and her husband viciously tore into each other like starving wolves fighting over a scrap of meat. Logan screamed about her betrayal, cursing her for hoarding a fortune while he faced federal prison and syndicate executioners. Kendra screamed back, mocking his pathetic failures, declaring that she deserved every single penny for putting up with his sloppy, incompetent schemes. Sitting in the cold, silent car, I felt absolutely no satisfaction listening to their marriage violently implode. I only felt a deep, crushing wave of profound regret. I stared at the dark dashboard, realizing the devastating truth of my own past actions. 8 years ago, when I discovered Kendra had stolen the $250,000 meant for Cynthia's experimental cancer treatments, I made a catastrophic mistake. I chose to absorb the blame. I let the entire family believe I was a degenerate gambler to protect my dying wife from the heartbreak of knowing her only child was a monster. I thought I was protecting the fragile remnants of our family. I thought my silent sacrifice was an act of profound paternal love. I was completely wrong. By shielding Kendra from the legal and social consequences of her monstrous theft, I did not save her. I enabled her. I validated her ruthless greed. My unearned forgiveness taught her that she could commit the most heinous acts of betrayal without ever facing a single consequence. I had cultivated the very parasite that was currently tearing its own life apart through the audio feed in my ear. True love requires unyielding accountability, and my failure to provide that discipline had directly created this nightmare. The explosive screaming match inside the master bedroom rapidly escalated from verbal abuse to a desperate physical struggle. The audio feed captured the chaotic sounds of a violent tug of war. Logan, despite his shattered arm, was frantically trying to shove the stacks of hidden cash into a duffel bag, desperately fighting for his only ticket out of the country. Kendra was not going to let her secret escape fund disappear. She shrieked wildly, physically grappling with him, throwing heavy objects across the room to keep him away from the door. Then Kendra executed a maneuver of pure sociopathic brilliance. She suddenly stopped fighting. I heard the sharp, distinct sound of a door slamming shut and a heavy lock sliding into place. She had retreated into the master bathroom, leaving Logan alone in the destroyed bedroom. A few seconds later, the unmistakable tone of an emergency dispatcher leaked through the audio feed. Kendra had dialed 911. Her voice underwent an instantaneous, terrifying transformation. The vicious, screaming harpy vanished instantly, replaced by the trembling, hyperventilating sobs of a terrified victim. She wept hysterically into the phone, claiming her husband had suffered a psychotic break. She told the dispatcher he had violently smashed his own arm in a fit of rage, was destroying their entire home, and was currently attempting to physically assault her to steal her life savings. She begged for police intervention, her performance flawlessly executing the role of the battered, helpless wife. Because of the affluent nature of the neighborhood, 3 police cruisers arrived in less than 4 minutes. I watched through the tinted windshield of my sedan as the officers rushed the front door with their weapons drawn. The audio feed captured the brutal, chaotic arrest. The police breached the master bedroom, finding a sweating, frantic man with a broken arm standing in the middle of a completely trashed room, clutching a duffel bag stuffed with cash. Logan screamed that the money was his, that his wife was a manipulative liar, and that he was being framed. His frantic, wild demeanor only cemented his guilt in the eyes of the arresting officers. They tackled him to the floor, reading him his rights as they locked him in heavy steel cuffs for domestic assault and attempted robbery. I watched impassively as the officers dragged Logan out the front door and shoved him roughly into the back of a squad car. Kendra stood gracefully on her expansive front porch, clutching a designer shawl tightly around her shoulders. She wiped a single, perfectly timed tear from her cheek, playing the tragic survivor for the sympathetic officers. As the squad cars drove away, carrying her husband off to a jail cell he would likely never leave, the mask slipped. Kendra stood alone on the porch, looking out into the dark street. A slow, triumphant smirk spread across her face. She truly believed she had won. She thought she had successfully discarded her useless husband, secured her hidden fortune, and escaped the entire catastrophe completely unscathed. She had absolutely no idea that I was sitting less than a block away, preparing the final, devastating legal strike that would ensure she lost absolutely everything. The very next morning, the heavy mahogany doors of Mr. Vogel's downtown law office swung open. Kendra walked in, completely transformed. The panicked, weeping victim from the porch the night before was entirely gone, replaced by a picture of pristine, manufactured grace. She wore a modest, impeccably tailored navy dress, her hair pulled back into a conservative style designed to project pure innocence. She sat down across from Vogel's desk, placing her designer handbag neatly on her lap. She had absolutely no idea I was sitting quietly in the high-backed leather chair in the shadowy corner of the spacious office, entirely concealed from her immediate view. Kendra cleared her throat and began her masterclass performance. "Mr. Vogel," she said, her voice dripping with practiced mournful sorrow, "I am here to formally distance myself from the criminal actions of my estranged husband. Logan was an abusive, manipulative monster. He forged my signatures, he threatened my life, and he coerced me into participating in that horrific guardianship scheme against my father. I am a victim of severe domestic and financial abuse, but now that he is safely incarcerated, I am ready to step up and take my rightful place in managing this family." She leaned forward, placing a perfectly manicured hand on Vogel's glass desk. "I want to reach a private settlement regarding my father's estate. Given his declining health and the immense trauma we have all endured, I believe it is only fair that the assets are divided immediately to avoid a lengthy court battle. I am willing to accept a 50% liquidation of the commercial holding company as a comprehensive settlement to rebuild my shattered life. If my father agrees to this generous compromise, I will gracefully step away and not pursue any further legal action against him for the emotional distress he caused our family." It was a breathtaking display of pure, unadulterated audacity. She was attempting to extort half of my empire while wearing the stolen mask of a battered survivor. I slowly stood up from the leather chair in the shadows and stepped directly into the light. "You are not getting a single dime from me, Kendra," I stated, my voice echoing like a judge's heavy gavel. Kendra jumped in her seat, genuinely startled by my sudden materialization, but she recovered with terrifying speed. She crossed her arms defensively, her posture rigid with defiance. "You can deny it all you want, Dad," she scoffed, her eyes narrowing. "But the public narrative is entirely on my side. Everyone in our extended family knows exactly what you did to Mom. Everyone knows you gambled away her cancer treatments and destroyed our lives. You owe me this settlement for the hell you put us through." I did not engage with her delusional rant. I walked slowly over to Mr. Vogel's desk, reached into my inner suit pocket, and pulled out a small vintage digital voice recorder. I placed it gently on the center of the glass surface. "For 8 long years, you have paraded around this city as the tragic daughter of a degenerate father," I said, maintaining absolute chilling eye contact. "You convinced our entire bloodline that I was a monster. You convinced yourself that your vicious lies were the absolute truth. But you forgot one crucial detail about your mother. Cynthia was not just a loving wife. She was a deeply perceptive woman who saw right through your manipulative facade." I pressed the play button on the small device. The quiet office filled with the unmistakable fragile sound of Cynthia's voice. The audio was slightly muffled, recorded in the sterile confines of her hospice room just 2 days before she passed away. Her breathing was labored heavy with fluid, but her words were devastatingly clear. "Martin, my sweet Martin," Cynthia whispered through the tiny speaker. "I know the absolute truth. I saw the bank transfer receipts Kendra carelessly left in her coat pocket when she visited yesterday. I know she took the money. I know our little girl stole the treatment funds." A sharp intake of breath echoed on the recording, followed by a weak, agonizing sob. "Please, Martin," Cynthia pleaded, her voice breaking with the ultimate heartbreak of a dying mother. "Do not call the police. Do not let her rot in a federal prison. If they arrest our only child, it will kill my spirit before the cancer even finishes the job. Promise me you will protect her. Let her walk away from this. I will carry the agonizing pain of her betrayal to my grave, but you must promise me you will not destroy her life." The recording ended with the soft, tragic sound of me weeping, swearing a solemn oath to my dying wife that I would absorb the blame to keep her at peace. I clicked the device off. The silence in the office was absolute. The foundational lie Kendra had built her entire adult life upon was completely pulverized. She stared at the small black recorder, her eyes wide, her mouth trembling, as the horrifying reality washed over her. Her mother had known exactly what a monster she was before she took her final breath. I watched her face, intently waiting for the devastating weight of her mother's heartbreak to finally crush her. I waited for a single tear of genuine remorse, for a desperate plea of forgiveness, or for the crushing realization of the immense silent sacrifice I had made to keep her out of a concrete prison cell. But Kendra was far too gone. The toxic rot inside her soul had consumed any lingering trace of human empathy. The initial shock on her face slowly hardened into a cold, calculating mask of pure survival. She straightened her posture, brushing a microscopic piece of lint from her navy dress. Then she let out a short, dismissive, and utterly sociopathic laugh. "Is that supposed to break me?" "Dad," she sneered, her voice completely devoid of guilt or shame. "You held onto a pathetic emotional recording for 8 years just to play it for me now. So what if Mom knew? It changes absolutely nothing about the current reality. You still took the blame. You still let the entire family hate you. That was your own stupid, foolish choice, and it does not make you a hero. It makes you a weak old man." She stood up from her leather chair, looking down at me with sheer, unadulterated arrogance. "And if you think you can use that little tape recording to threaten me legally, you really are losing your mind. I know the law, Dad. I consulted with top defense attorneys years ago just to be completely certain. Grand theft and wire fraud are serious felonies, yes. But the statute of limitations for financial crimes in this jurisdiction is exactly 5 years. It has been 8 years since that money was transferred out of your account. You cannot press criminal charges. You cannot hand that tape over to the district attorney. The legal window for prosecution has permanently slammed shut. I am completely and utterly untouchable. You have absolutely no leverage over me. So unless you want me to walk out of this office and go straight to the media with my domestic abuse allegations, I highly suggest you reconsider my settlement offer. I am walking away from this family with millions, or I am burning your reputation to the ground." She grabbed her designer handbag and took a confident step toward the heavy oak doors, entirely convinced she had just outsmarted me one final time. I did not move to block her path. I did not show an ounce of frustration. I simply looked at Mr. Vogel. The seasoned lawyer offered a cold, clinical smile and reached for a pristine white folder resting on the very edge of his desk. "You are absolutely correct about the criminal statute of limitations for grand theft, Kendra," I said, my voice echoing with the chilling finality of an executioner. "But you clearly did not consult your expensive attorneys about the precise, unforgiving mechanics of commercial contract law." Kendra stopped her march to the door and turned around, letting out a sharp, mocking laugh that bounced off the mahogany walls. She looked at me not with fear, but with the pitying gaze one might reserve for a delusional child. "Commercial contract law," she repeated, rolling her eyes as she sauntered back toward the center of the room. "Are you honestly trying to scare me with civil litigation jargon, Dad? You are grasping at straws. You think because you outsmarted Logan and his sloppy mortgage fraud that you can somehow invent a magical lawsuit against me. It does not work that way. I stole that money straight out of your joint checking account. It was a direct, unauthorized wire transfer. It was a crime, plain and simple, and the time to punish me for that crime expired 3 years ago. The state will not touch it. The police will laugh you out of the precinct. There is absolutely no legal loophole that allows you to suddenly sue me for a theft the government legally considers ancient history." She leaned her hip against the edge of Mr. Vogel's desk, crossing her arms and tapping her manicured fingernails against her sleeve. "You have nothing but a cassette tape of a dying woman crying. That might win you some sympathy points in a cheap daytime soap opera, but in the real world it is completely useless. The law protects me. The calendar protects me. I am walking out of this building, and I am going straight to a public relations firm. I will give you exactly 24 hours to transfer $2 million into my private offshore account. If you fail to meet that deadline, every news outlet in this city will run front-page stories about the wealthy real estate mogul who violently abused his family. You cannot touch me. You are entirely powerless." She smiled, a cold reptilian curving of her lips, fully believing she had secured the ultimate checkmate. I did not raise my voice to argue with her arrogant delusions. I simply gestured toward Mr. Vogel. The seasoned attorney opened the pristine white folder he had been resting his hand on and extracted a thick, multi-page legal document. He slid it across the glass surface, bringing it to a halt right next to Kendra's designer handbag. "Kendra," Mr. Vogel began, his voice maintaining the absolute clinical detachment of a surgeon performing an amputation. "Your father is a master accountant. When you forged his signature to execute that $250,000 wire transfer 8 years ago, you triggered an immediate fraud alert. He was notified by the bank while the funds were still pending in the clearinghouse. Instead of halting the transfer and having you arrested for grand larceny, he made a highly strategic, legally binding adjustment." Kendra frowned, her smug smile faltering slightly as she looked down at the document. "What adjustment?" she snapped. "It was a wire transfer. It went straight into Logan's dummy account." "It did not," Mr. Vogel corrected smoothly. "Your father intercepted the clearance process. He authorized the release of the funds, but he completely reclassified the nature of the transaction. He did not allow it to process as a personal withdrawal. Instead, he routed the money through a private corporate lending entity he fully controlled. He then attached the exact forged signature you provided on the bank slip to a legally binding commercial promissory note. You did not steal $250,000, Kendra. According to the irrefutable registered financial records of the state, you took out a high-interest, unsecured commercial loan." Kendra snatched the document off the desk, her eyes scanning the bold legal print. "This is insane," she shouted, her hands beginning to tremble. "I never signed a loan agreement. This is a complete fabrication. You cannot enforce a contract I never agreed to. You agreed to it the absolute second you forged your father's signature to execute the transfer," Vogel countered flawlessly. "Under state commercial code, by creating a fraudulent financial instrument to acquire capital, you legally bound yourself to the terms set by the issuing party. Your father quietly registered this promissory note with the county clerk 8 years ago. He paid the annual registration fees. He established a perfectly legal, completely bulletproof paper trail. The statute of limitations for prosecuting a criminal theft may be 5 years, but the statute of limitations for collecting a defaulted commercial debt is an entirely different matter. It does not expire. It simply accumulates." The color began to drain rapidly from Kendra's face as her eyes locked onto the specific financial terms printed on the second page of the contract. I watched the devastating realization wash over her as the trap I had set nearly a decade ago finally snapped shut around her throat. "You see, Kendra," I said, my voice cold and unyielding. "Commercial lending comes with very specific penalties for non-payment. The principal amount you borrowed was $250,000, but you have not made a single monthly payment in 8 years. You have ignored 96 consecutive billing cycles. The compounding interest rate on this unsecured corporate note was set at a standard legally permissible 18%. Add to that the late fees, the default penalties, and the legal collection costs. Mr. Vogel, please inform my daughter of her current outstanding balance." Vogel pulled a certified bank statement from the folder. "As of 9 o'clock this morning, your total legally enforceable debt to your father's holding company stands at exactly $612,480. Kendra dropped the document as if it had burned her fingers. She stumbled backward, gasping for air. "I do not have that kind of money." She hyperventilated, her voice cracking in sheer panic. "Logan lost everything. We are bankrupt. I have nothing for you to take. You cannot get blood from a stone." "That is where you are completely wrong," Vogel interrupted, producing a final sheet of paper adorned with a bright red judicial seal. "We are fully aware of the secret slush fund you were hiding from your husband. We know about the fireproof box in your closet containing the cash bundles, the conflict diamonds, and the gold bullion. My private investigator has been listening to your household audio feed for weeks." I added, my gaze stripping away her final layer of defense. "I heard you and Logan fighting over it. I heard the police arrest him while you stood on the porch believing you had secured your wealthy escape. What you did not realize is that while you were sleeping last night, Mr. Vogel took this loan agreement directly to an emergency civil magistrate. He presented the undeniable proof of your massive defaulted debt and requested an immediate writ of execution to prevent you from fleeing the jurisdiction with hidden assets." Vogel slid the red-stamped document across the desk. "The judge granted the writ at dawn. As we speak, court-appointed marshals are executing a civil seizure at your estate. They are confiscating the lockbox. They are impounding your luxury vehicle. They are freezing the few remaining personal bank accounts you hold. Every single asset you possess is being legally seized to satisfy this outstanding commercial debt. You walked into this office thinking you were untouchable. You are walking out with absolutely nothing." Kendra was paralyzed, the devastating reality of her absolute bankruptcy pinning her to the floor. Before she could even formulate a single word of protest, a violent commotion erupted outside Mr. Vogel's private office. The heavy oak doors were forcefully shoved open completely, ignoring the receptionist's frantic protests. 3 massive men stepped into the room. I immediately recognized the jagged scar running down the jawline of the lead enforcer. It was the exact same syndicate crew Logan had tried to sell me to just a few days prior. The scarred man did not look at me or Mr. Vogel. His predatory gaze locked directly onto Kendra. "Logan is sitting in a county jail cell facing federal tax evasion and domestic assault charges," the enforcer growled, his heavy boots thudding against the polished marble. "His underground accounts are completely frozen. That means his $500,000 syndicate debt falls directly onto his legally wedded wife." Kendra backed away, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. She bumped into the heavy glass desk, trapping herself. "I do not have anything," she stammered, her voice a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. "My father just seized everything I own. I am completely broke." The scarred man did not care about her civil litigations or her seized assets. He lunged forward with terrifying speed, wrapping his massive, calloused hand directly around Kendra's throat. He lifted her effortlessly off the ground, her expensive designer heels dangling inches above the marble floor. She clawed frantically at his thick wrist, gasping for air as her face turned a violent shade of purple. "The syndicate does not care about your family drama, little girl," the enforcer whispered, his face mere inches from hers. "You have exactly 60 seconds to tell me how you are going to pay back $500,000, or I am going to snap your neck right here in this office and leave you for the cleaning crew." The enforcer held her suspended for a few agonizing seconds, letting the absolute reality of her imminent death sink in before carelessly dropping her. Kendra collapsed onto the hard floor, coughing violently and gasping for oxygen. She scrambled backward, her manicured hands slipping on the polished marble until she hit the sturdy wooden legs of my chair. She looked up at me, her mascara smeared across her face, her carefully constructed facade of arrogant superiority entirely obliterated. She was no longer the smug manipulator trying to extort me for millions. She was a terrified animal staring directly into the jaws of a predator. "Dad," she choked out, her voice a raw, agonizing rasp. "Dad, please. You have to stop them. You have to save me." I sat perfectly still, looking down at the pathetic creature clutching the hem of my tailored trousers. The sheer irony of the situation was almost suffocating. For 8 years she had paraded around the city, painting me as a vicious, abusive monster while she lived in absolute luxury funded by her mother's stolen lifeblood. Now she was literally crawling at my feet, begging the monster to shield her from the very criminal underworld she and her husband had eagerly climbed into. "Please, Dad, I will do anything," Kendra sobbed, burying her face against my knees. "I know you have the money. I know you control their offshore accounts. You showed Logan you could buy his debt. Buy mine. Pay them off. I will never ask you for another dime. I will disappear. I will leave the state today. Just please, do not let them kill me." Her tears soaked into the fabric of my trousers, her entire body shaking with violent, uncontrollable tremors. The scarred enforcer stood a few feet away, rolling his shoulders and waiting for my command. He knew exactly who I was, and he knew I held the ultimate power in this room. I looked down at my daughter. There was no paternal warmth left in my soul, no instinct to protect the child I had once raised. That child had died the exact second she unhooked the diamond necklace from her dying mother's throat. I reached down, grabbed her firmly by the shoulders, and forced her to sit back on her heels, pushing her away from my legs. "I will not give you a single cent out of the goodness of my heart, Kendra," I said, my voice echoing with absolute freezing detachment. "You exhausted my mercy a decade ago, but I am a businessman, and I am willing to negotiate a transaction." Kendra wiped her bruised neck, staring up at me with desperate wide eyes. "What transaction?" She gasped, her breath still catching in her throat. "Whatever you want. Name your price." I leaned forward in my chair, locking my eyes onto hers with a gaze so cold it could shatter glass. "I will authorize the immediate transfer of $500,000 to satisfy your syndicate debt," I stated, enunciating every single syllable with lethal precision. "I will buy your life from these men standing behind you. But in exchange, you are going to give me the one thing you value more than your hidden cash, more than your designer clothes, and more than your own husband. You are going to give me your pristine, fraudulent reputation." Kendra froze her eyes, darting nervously toward Mr. Vogel, who had already retrieved a blank legal pad and a silver pen, placing them squarely on the glass desk. "You are going to sit at that desk," I continued, my voice unwavering, "and you are going to write a comprehensive, fully detailed public confession. You will document exactly how you forged my signature 8 years ago to steal $250,000. You will detail how that money was meant to fund your mother's experimental cancer treatments. You will explicitly write how you lied to her on her deathbed, how you stole her anniversary necklace while she was dying, and how you maliciously framed me as a degenerate gambler to protect yourself from federal prison. You will sign this document, date it, and provide your thumbprint. Mr. Vogel will notarize it immediately." Kendra stared at the blank paper as if it were a loaded weapon. "But if I write that," she whispered, her voice trembling with absolute dread, "you will destroy my life. Everyone in the extended family will see it. I will be completely ruined. I will never be able to show my face in this city again." I did not blink. I did not offer a single ounce of sympathy. "You destroyed your own life the second you prioritized your greed over your mother's survival," I replied coldly. "I am simply forcing you to finally hand the truth over to the people you lied to for nearly a decade." The scarred enforcer took a heavy, deliberate step forward, cracking his knuckles with a sickening pop. "You have exactly 30 seconds to pick up that pen, little girl," the enforcer growled, "or the deal is off, and we go for a very long ride in the trunk of my van." Kendra looked at the massive, violent men ready to end her life, then looked back at the blank legal pad. Shaking uncontrollably, she slowly crawled toward the desk and picked up the silver pen. Kendra held the silver fountain pen aloft, her hand trembling so violently that the polished metal rattled against the glass surface of the desk. She stared at the blank legal pad as if it were a bottomless abyss threatening to swallow her entire existence. For a woman like Kendra, social status was her oxygen. The country club memberships, the exclusive charity gala invitations, the admiring glances from other wealthy suburban housewives were the foundational pillars of her hollow universe. To write this confession meant detonating a nuclear bomb inside her own meticulously curated life. She looked at me, her eyes brimming with a desperate, pathetic defiance. "I cannot do this, Dad," she whimpered, the pen slipping from her fingers and clattering onto the desk. "You are asking me to commit social suicide. My friends will abandon me. The local media will crucify me. I will be an absolute pariah in this city. I can work for you. I can pay you back over time. Just please do not make me destroy my own name." Her vanity was truly boundless. Even with a violent syndicate enforcer standing just inches behind her ready to end her life, she was still desperately trying to negotiate the preservation of her fraudulent public image. The scarred enforcer had clearly reached the absolute limit of his patience. He did not yell. He did not issue another verbal warning. He simply reached inside his dark tactical jacket and withdrew a heavy suppressed semi-automatic pistol. The dull metallic clack of the slide being racked echoed through the quiet office with terrifying finality. He stepped forward, grabbed a fistful of Kendra's perfectly styled hair and jerked her head back roughly. He pressed the cold steel muzzle of the silencer directly against the base of her skull. "You do not have friends anymore," the enforcer whispered, his voice vibrating with lethal intent. "You have exactly 10 seconds to start writing, or I am going to paint this expensive glass desk with your brains." The sheer freezing reality of the gun barrel pressed against her skin instantly shattered the last remaining fragments of Kendra's delusion. The paralyzing fear of public humiliation was violently overridden by the primal screaming instinct to simply survive the next 10 seconds. She let out a guttural, hyperventilating sob, her manicured hands desperately fumbling across the glass desk to retrieve the fallen silver pen. She gripped it so tightly her knuckles turned entirely white. She leaned over the legal pad, her tears falling freely now, splashing onto the pristine yellow paper and making the blue ink bleed. Kendra?" She began to write, her voice a broken, agonizing whisper as she read the words aloud to satisfy the enforcer's demand. I sat back in my high-backed leather chair, my posture perfectly relaxed. Mr. Vogel, completely unbothered by the deadly weapon drawn in his office, quietly poured a fresh cup of Earl Grey tea from a porcelain carafe on his credenza. He handed the steaming teacup to me. I accepted it with a polite nod, lifting it to my lips and taking a slow, appreciative sip. The bergamot aroma was soothing, a stark contrast to the absolute psychological devastation unfolding just a few feet away. Right about the hospital room, I instructed, my voice calm, smooth, and entirely devoid of mercy. "Be highly specific. Describe the exact date you forged my signature on the wire transfer. Detail the precise moment you leaned over your dying mother and unhooked her diamond anniversary necklace while she was gasping for air. Do not leave out a single treacherous detail." Kendra choked on her own tears, her chest heaving as she forced her hand to drag the pen across the paper. She was physically writing her own ruin, permanently etching her monstrous sins into an undeniable legal record. I watched her over the rim of my teacup. Every stroke of the pen was a fatal blow to her massive ego. The arrogant, untouchable daughter who had terrorized me for a decade was bleeding out onto that yellow pad. Her false identity, her victimhood, her entire existence was crumbling into dust right before my eyes. I felt absolutely no guilt. I felt no lingering paternal sorrow. I simply felt the cold, profound satisfaction of a heavily unbalanced scale finally being set right. She filled the first page, flipped it over with a trembling hand, and continued detailing her horrific betrayals on the second, her spirit completely and utterly broken. Kendra finished the final agonizing sentence of her comprehensive confession. She dropped the pen, letting out a hollow, exhausted gasp. Mr. Vogel swiftly produced a blue ink pad. Kendra mindlessly pressed her thumb into the ink and stamped her fingerprint directly next to her trembling signature. Vogel pulled the document away, retrieved his official notary press, and clamped it down on the paper with a heavy, satisfying thud. "It is done," Kendra sobbed, collapsing forward until her forehead rested against the cold glass of the desk. She kept her eyes squeezed shut, bracing herself, fully expecting me to initiate the wire transfer to save her life. But the scarred enforcer never got the chance to verify the funds. Before he could even lower his suppressed pistol, the heavy double doors of the law office exploded completely off their hinges. The deafening crash shook the entire room. A tactical unit of heavily armored police officers flooded into the office like a tidal wave. "Drop the weapon! Drop it now!" the lead officer roared, aiming a high-powered rifle directly at the syndicate leader. The gangsters, caught entirely off guard by the massive coordinated ambush, instantly recognized they were completely outgunned. The scarred man dropped his pistol, the heavy weapon clattering uselessly against the marble floor. The officers swarmed them, driving the enforcers face first into the ground and securing their wrists with heavy plastic zip ties. Mitchell had orchestrated the raid, perfectly timing the police intervention to the exact minute Kendra finished her paperwork. Kendra lifted her head, gasping in shock, as the violent men who had just threatened her life were dragged away. A brief, foolish wave of relief washed over her tear-stained face. She truly believed I had orchestrated a dramatic rescue to protect her, assuming her confession would now be kept as a private family secret. She was catastrophically wrong. The lead detective, a stern man with silver hair, holstered his weapon and walked directly over to Mr. Vogel's desk. Vogel did not hesitate. He picked up the freshly notarized ink-stained confession and handed it squarely to the detective. Officer Vogel stated with crisp legal precision, "This is a sworn notarized confession detailing grand larceny, systemic wire fraud, and the theft of high-value assets from a vulnerable dying patient." Kendra shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated horror. She realized instantly that the document was not just a tool to satisfy my personal vengeance, it was a formal evidentiary submission. Even if the criminal statute of limitations on the original theft had expired, her signed admission of systemic financial fraud provided the exact probable cause the authorities needed to seize all of her remaining assets and launch a devastating federal investigation into her recent banking activities. The confession was now official police evidence, ensuring her total, inescapable destruction. 3 months later, the sterile wood-paneled walls of the county civil courthouse served as the final battleground for a marriage built entirely on deception and unmitigated greed. The divorce and debt apportionment hearing between Kendra and Logan was a public spectacle of pure, unadulterated venom. Logan sat at the respondent's table wearing a bright orange county jail jumpsuit, his wrists shackled to a thick chain around his waist. He looked completely feral, his skin pale and his eyes sunken from months of federal incarceration. Across the aisle sat Kendra. Stripped of her seized designer wardrobe and luxury assets, she wore a drab, poorly fitted gray suit she had likely purchased from a discount rack. The moment the presiding judge called the hearing to order, the courtroom devolved into a vicious, snarling dogfight. They did not fight over custody or cherished family heirlooms. They fought desperately to shove the crushing weight of their massive financial ruin onto each other. Logan spat vicious insults across the aisle, loudly testifying that Kendra was a manipulative sociopath who had secretly hoarded hundreds of thousands of dollars in a hidden closet safe while he was being hunted by violent syndicate enforcers. He claimed she was the master architect of the fraudulent guardianship scheme against me, painting himself as a naive, overworked husband misled by a greedy, vindictive wife. Kendra shrieked back, her voice echoing shrilly off the high ceiling. She slammed her hands on the defense table, pointing an accusing finger at his shackled wrists. She testified that Logan was a violent, abusive fraud who had forged her signature on multiple commercial loans and completely destroyed her pristine life. She demanded absolute legal immunity, screaming that she was a helpless victim of his disastrous hedge fund collapse. They tore into each other without an ounce of loyalty, exposing every dirty secret, every lie, and every malicious plot they had ever hatched in the dark. They were two drowning rats, desperately trying to climb on top of each other to keep their heads above the rising water. I sat in the very back row of the spectator gallery, perfectly still, my hands resting comfortably on the silver handle of my cane. I wore a meticulously tailored navy suit, projecting an aura of quiet, untouchable authority. I did not interject. I did not offer any testimony. I simply sat in the shadows and watched the spectacular, fiery collapse of the empire of lies they had built together. Looking at them tearing each other to pieces, I felt a profound, chilling emptiness. There was no residual anger left in my heart, nor was there any tragic paternal sorrow. The emotional tether that had once connected me to the woman shrieking at the defense table had been completely severed the moment I heard her written confession. I was merely a spectator watching a highly predictable mathematical equation finally balance itself out. Greed multiplied by betrayal inevitably equals absolute destruction. Mr. Vogel sat beside me occasionally, taking brief notes on a yellow legal pad, his face a mask of strict professional detachment. He leaned over slightly, keeping his eyes fixed on the chaotic scene unfolding before the judge. "It is remarkable how quickly thieves turn on each other when the gold runs out," Vogel whispered quietly. I offered a slow, microscopic nod of agreement. For 8 years, Kendra and Logan had operated under the supreme delusion that they were the smartest people in any room. They believed that empathy was a fatal weakness, and that raw, unchecked ambition justified any cruelty. They thought they had successfully discarded me as a useless, senile obstacle. Yet here they were publicly eviscerating each other in a desperate, pathetic attempt to escape the very traps they had set for me. I watched Kendra's face contort into an ugly, hateful sneer as she hurled another vicious accusation at her shackled husband. This was her true face, entirely stripped of the country club glamour and the fake victimhood she had weaponized for nearly a decade. She was a hollow, empty shell completely consumed by the toxic rot she had chosen to nurture. I did not feel a shred of guilt for orchestrating the exact circumstances that led her to this courtroom. I had simply held up a mirror to her soul and allowed the world to finally see the monster lurking beneath the surface. The heavy wooden gavel banged loudly against the sounding block, cutting through the toxic screaming match. The judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics, demanded absolute silence. The time for throwing blame had officially ended. The time for the final devastating legal judgment had arrived. The courtroom fell into a tense, suffocating silence as the judge adjusted her reading glasses and looked down at the massive stack of financial documents spread across her bench. She did not look at Kendra or Logan with any degree of sympathy. She looked at them with the exhausted disgust of a civil magistrate who had spent decades sorting through the wreckage of human greed. The criminal investigations regarding the federal tax evasion and the medical fraud are entirely separate matters to be handled by the respective state and federal authorities. The judge began, her voice ringing out with cold, absolute finality. This court is solely concerned with the dissolution of this marriage and the legal apportionment of the massive civil debt accrued during the marital union. Kendra stood up slightly, clutching the edge of her table, her eyes wide with desperate, pleading hope. She genuinely believed that her aggressive courtroom performance had successfully shifted the entire financial burden onto Logan. The judge picked up a finalized decree and stared directly at Kendra. "Mrs. Logan," the judge stated, her tone sharp and unforgiving, "you have repeatedly claimed ignorance regarding your husband's illicit financial activities. However, the forensic financial audit clearly demonstrates that you directly benefited from these fraudulent loans. You lived in a mansion funded by stolen capital. You maintained a hidden lockbox containing hundreds of thousands of dollars in untraceable assets while simultaneously claiming total financial ignorance. Furthermore, the commercial loans in question were signed during the legal duration of your marriage." Kendra's breath hitched a look of pure, unadulterated dread washing over her pale face. Therefore, the judge continued, dropping the final devastating hammer blow. "This court finds that you are jointly and severally liable for the financial obligations incurred during this union. The total outstanding civil debt, including the defaulted loans to the private holding company and the remaining syndicate obligations, stands at approximately $5.5 million. By order of this court, you are legally mandated to assume exactly 50% of that total debt. You are personally responsible for $2.75 million payable immediately." The words hit the courtroom like a physical shockwave. Kendra's jaw dropped open, her eyes bulging as her brain desperately tried to process the catastrophic numbers. $2.75 million. She was not just bankrupt, she was buried under a mountain of debt she could not possibly repay in 10 lifetimes. Her wages would be heavily garnished forever. She would never own property again. She was financially ruined until the day she died. "No," Kendra gasped, her voice a thin, fragile wheeze. "No, you cannot do this to me. I have nothing. I am a victim." The judge simply banged her gavel, finalizing the catastrophic ruling. Kendra took one unsteady step backward. Her eyes rolled up into the back of her head, fluttering wildly as all the blood rushed from her brain. Her knees buckled instantly. She collapsed like a severed puppet, her body hitting the hard wooden floor of the courtroom with a heavy, lifeless thud. I sat in the back row, my face completely impassive, watching the bailiffs rush forward to check her pulse. The debt had finally been collected. 3 months had passed since the heavy wooden gavel shattered Kendra and Logan's empire of deceit. The blistering summer heat had settled over the city, bringing with it a suffocating humidity that perfectly mirrored the inescapable reality of their new lives. Logan was no longer wearing tailored Italian suits or pitching phantom real estate portfolios at exclusive country clubs. He was wearing a bright neon orange safety vest stained with dark patches of sweat. He was currently serving his court-mandated community service on the side of a busy, loud interstate highway while he awaited his primary federal trial. The man who once bragged about managing millions of dollars was now holding a cheap metal grabber tool, painfully bending over to pick up discarded fast food wrappers and empty beer bottles. His broken arm, which had not healed properly due to his lack of premium medical insurance, throbbed with every movement. A stern county sheriff stood nearby, ensuring Logan did not take a single unauthorized break under the punishing sun. Across town, far away from the affluent neighborhoods she used to terrorize, Kendra was experiencing her own personal hell. She was working the double shift at a rundown, greasy diner located in a decaying industrial park. The woman who once spent thousands of dollars on designer handbags was now wearing a hideous, stiff polyester uniform that constantly smelled of stale fryer grease and cheap bleach. She balanced a heavy tray of plates, her feet aching in cheap, unsupportive sneakers. She accidentally spilled a few drops of hot coffee onto the table of a burly, aggressively impatient truck driver. The man stood up and yelled at her, his voice booming across the crowded diner. He called her stupid and demanded she clean it up immediately. 3 months ago, Kendra would have slapped the man and demanded the manager fire him. Today, completely broken by the reality of her $2.75 million debt and relentless wage garnishments, she simply bowed her head. She frantically wiped the table with a dirty gray rag, apologizing profusely through gritted teeth, desperately needing the $2 tip just to afford her bus fare back to the cramped, pest-infested studio apartment she now rented. Directly across the cracked asphalt of the diner parking lot, parked discreetly in the shadow of a decaying billboard, sat a pristine, sleek black Mercedes Maybach. I sat in the spacious rear passenger seat, surrounded by the scent of rich, hand-stitched leather and the gentle, icy hum of the premium air conditioning. The heavily tinted windows offered me a perfect, unobstructed view of the diner's large front window. I watched Kendra scrub the sticky table. I watched the angry customer berate her. I watched her swallow her massive toxic pride and cower in submission. I sat there with my hands resting calmly on the silver handle of my cane, observing her humiliation with absolute chilling detachment. I did not smile. I did not feel a sudden rush of triumphant joy or petty vindication. Gloating is an emotion reserved for the insecure, for those who need validation from the suffering of others. I felt no such need. I was merely witnessing the cold, undeniable mechanics of universal justice. I looked at the woman in the stained uniform and compared her to the woman who had proudly worn her dead mother's stolen platinum necklace in my lawyer's office. She had believed she was an apex predator, entirely immune to the consequences of her monstrous greed. She had truly believed that she could steal from her dying mother, frame her father, and walk away to live a life of unearned luxury. I had not destroyed her life. I had simply stopped shielding her from the real world. By removing the financial safety net I had quietly provided for decades, the universe was finally allowed to balance its ledger. The brutal reality of manual labor, public humiliation, and inescapable poverty was not a punishment I had invented. It was the exact life she had earned through her own treacherous choices. My presence here today was not to mock her. It was to finalize my own internal closure. I needed to see with my own eyes that the parasite had been permanently removed from my bloodline. I needed to witness the absolute death of her arrogance to ensure she would never possess the power to harm another human being again. I took a slow, deep breath of the cool, purified air inside the cabin, my heart beating with a steady, peaceful rhythm that I had not felt in 8 long years. The heavy glass door of the diner swung open, violently propped ajar by Kendra's shoulder. She stumbled out into the sweltering afternoon heat, dragging 2 massive, leaking black garbage bags toward the rusted dumpster in the alleyway. Sweat plastered her hair to her forehead, and a dark stain of old grease covered the front of her apron. She hurled the heavy bags into the metal bin with a frustrated, exhausted groan, leaning heavily against the brick wall to catch her breath. As she wiped her face with the back of her trembling hand, her eyes scanned the desolate parking lot and locked directly onto the black Mercedes parked across the street. She knew that car. She knew exactly who was sitting in the back seat. For a brief moment, she froze, her chest heaving. Then a massive wave of desperate, delusional hope washed over her dirty face. She truly believed I had come to rescue her. She thought that watching her suffer for 3 months had finally broken my resolve that her father had come to pay her impossible debts and take her back to a life of privilege. "Dad!" she screamed, her voice cracking as she pushed off the brick wall and began sprinting across the cracked pavement. "Dad, wait. I am so sorry. Please." She ran recklessly, dodging a passing pickup truck, her cheap sneakers slapping loudly against the hot asphalt. I watched her approaching rapidly in the rearview mirror. I did not instruct my driver to speed away. I waited until she crossed the street and reached the side of the vehicle. I pressed the button on my armrest, and the heavy tinted glass rolled down exactly 4 inches, just enough for her to see my eyes. She slammed her hands against the polished black door, leaving greasy, sweaty handprints on the pristine paint. "Dad, you came back," she sobbed, tears cutting clean lines through the grime on her cheeks. "I cannot do this anymore. I am starving. I am exhausted. Please, I learned my lesson. I will do whatever you want. Take me home." I looked at her, my expression as unyielding as a granite monument. I did not offer a single word of comfort. I did not yell. I simply maintained cold, silent eye contact for 5 long seconds, letting her look deep into my soul and realize there was absolutely nothing left for her there. I pressed the button again. The tinted window smoothly and silently glided upward, completely sealing off her desperate pleas. I tapped the soundproof partition separating me from my driver. "Drive," I commanded evenly. The massive 12-cylinder engine purred to life. The heavy luxury sedan pulled away from the curb with effortless, silent grace. Kendra shrieked, banging her fists against the trunk as the car accelerated. She tried to run after the vehicle, her arms reaching out in blind panic, but her exhausted legs gave out after only a few steps. I watched the surveillance monitor on my dashboard as she collapsed hard onto her knees in the middle of the filthy, sun-baked street. She buried her face in her hands, choking on the thick cloud of exhaust fumes and road dust left in my wake. I turned off the monitor, leaned back into the plush leather seat, and closed my eyes as the car carried me back toward the city, leaving her entirely behind in the wasteland she had built for herself. The crisp, sanitized air of the newly constructed oncology wing at the city medical center felt vastly different from the suffocating hospice room where Cynthia had taken her final breath 8 years ago. I stood behind a polished oak podium adjusting the microphone as a crowd of esteemed oncologists, hospital administrators, and local philanthropists offered a round of applause. Behind me, mounted on the pristine white wall, was a heavy bronze plaque bearing the name of the new facility, the Cynthia Memorial Cancer Support Fund. It was not just a vanity project to stroke my own ego. It was the absolute fulfillment of a promise I had made to the universe the day my wife was diagnosed. I gripped the edges of the podium, looking out at the attentive audience. I did not speak about my daughter or the vicious betrayal that had delayed this moment for nearly a decade. I spoke only of Cynthia, of her boundless grace, and of the agonizing financial barriers that so many vulnerable families face when fighting terminal illnesses. When the hospital director stepped up to accept the ceremonial oversized check, the digital display behind us flashed the exact initial endowment amount: $612,480. It was not a rounded arbitrary number. It was the precise down to the penny total of the defaulted commercial debt Mr. Vogel had legally extracted from Kendra's seized assets. The money that she had ruthlessly stolen from her dying mother's treatment fund had been violently clawed back. It had sat in my corporate holding accounts, gathering interest for 8 years, growing heavier and more lethal until it was finally weaponized against the thief. Now every single cent of that recovered capital was being injected directly into experimental cancer therapies for underprivileged women in our community. The stolen blood money had been completely purified. It was poetic, undeniable justice. As the cameras flashed and the medical staff cheered, I felt an immense, profound warmth spread through my chest. For the very first time since Cynthia closed her eyes, the heavy, suffocating weight of guilt that I had carried for failing to protect her treatment funds completely lifted from my shoulders. The debt had been paid in full, and her legacy was finally secure. Following the formal ribbon-cutting ceremony, a catered reception was held in the hospital's elegant glass atrium. Waiters in crisp white shirts circulated through the crowd with trays of sparkling cider and hors d'oeuvres. As I stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, taking a moment to appreciate the quiet victory a familiar, unwelcome presence encroached upon my personal space. It was a small group of my extended family members. My late wife's sister, Aunt Beatrice, led the charge, flanked by 2 of my cousins who had completely ignored my existence for the past 8 years. When Kendra had spun her malicious web of lies claiming I was a degenerate gambler who had squandered Cynthia's medical funds, these were the very people who had eagerly sharpened the pitchforks. They had banned me from family reunions, ignored my phone calls, and publicly embraced Kendra as the tragic surviving victim of my supposed domestic abuse. Now, having seen the devastating public release of Kendra's notarized confession and realizing the sheer staggering magnitude of my actual wealth, they had suddenly experienced a miraculous change of heart. "Oh, Martin," Beatrice cooed, stepping forward with her arms outstretched for a highly performative embrace. "We are just so incredibly proud of you. The facility is absolutely beautiful." Cynthia would be weeping with joy right now. I did not step forward to accept her hug. I remained perfectly rigid, my hands resting on my cane, forcing her to awkwardly drop her arms to her sides. Beatrice cleared her throat, a nervous, calculating smile plastered across her face. We were so deeply horrified when the truth about Kendra finally came out, she continued shifting her weight uncomfortably. "We always knew something was terribly wrong with that girl. We never truly believed those awful things she said about you. We were just manipulated by her lies. We want to mend fences, Martin. We are family after all, and with all the amazing philanthropic work you are doing now, we would love to talk to you about investing in my son's new commercial real estate venture." I looked at Beatrice, then at the cousins standing eagerly behind her, their eyes wide with undisguised greed. They had simply swapped one parasite for another, hoping to latch on to my newly revealed fortune. I did not raise my voice or cause a scene. I offered a slow, freezing, and flawlessly polite smile. "Beatrice," I said, my voice smooth and utterly devoid of warmth. "Family is not determined by shared blood or a common last name. Family is determined by unyielding loyalty in the absolute darkest moments of life. When I was drowning in grief, you did not reach out a hand. You handed my treacherous daughter a megaphone. I do not harbor any anger toward you, but I also do not harbor any remaining relation to you. You are nothing more than strangers who happen to share a few genetic markers. I suggest you enjoy the complimentary catering because it is the absolute last thing my wealth will ever provide for you." I turned my back on them without waiting for a response, leaving them standing in stunned, humiliated silence as I smoothly walked away toward the private administrative suites. I stepped out of the crowded atrium and walked down a quiet, carpeted hallway until I reached a private conference room reserved for hospital board members. Mr. Vogel was already waiting inside. He sat at the center of a polished conference table, his sleek leather briefcase open, carefully arranging a stack of highly official legal documents. He did not look up immediately as I entered and closed the heavy door behind me, sealing out the noise of the reception. "You handled the vultures in the lobby with remarkable restraint," Martin Vogel remarked dryly, finally looking up and adjusting his glasses. I took a seat across from him, resting my cane against the table. "Vultures only swarm when they smell a corpse," I replied calmly. "I simply reminded them that I am very much alive and entirely toxic to their appetites. Do you have the final paperwork?" Vogel nodded, extracting a thick, heavy envelope sealed with the official wax crest of the state Supreme Court. He slid it across the table. "When you initially requested this specific legal maneuver, I warned you that it was incredibly rare and exceedingly difficult to execute." Vogel stated, his tone shifting into strict professional gravity. "Family law is inherently designed to preserve the legal ties of next of kin, even in cases of severe estrangement. However, given the unprecedented nature of Kendra's notarized confession, the staggering magnitude of her financial fraud, and her documented attempt to medically hijack your autonomy, the presiding Supreme Court judge found our petition entirely justified." I opened the envelope and pulled out the heavy embossed judicial decree. It was a formal, irrevocable severance of all familial and civil ties. In the eyes of the law, Kendra was no longer my daughter. The legal mechanism completely stripped her of any standing as my next of kin. She had absolutely no right to contest my will, no authority to make medical decisions on my behalf should I ever become incapacitated, and no legal claim to my physical remains when I eventually passed away. She was completely erased from my civil existence, effectively rendered a legal ghost. "The state has officially recognized the total dissolution of your biological relationship," Vogel concluded, tapping his silver pen against the table. "If she ever attempts to contact you, approach your properties, or leverage your name for any reason, she will be immediately arrested for violating a permanent federal injunction. You owe her nothing. She is entirely gone." I stared at the thick black ink of the judge's signature at the bottom of the page. For decades, the biological imperative of fatherhood had been a heavy, suffocating chain wrapped tightly around my neck. It had forced me to tolerate abuse, to absorb blame, and to endlessly finance a monster simply because she shared my DNA. I picked up the silver pen Vogel offered me. I signed my name on the final acknowledgement line with smooth, deliberate strokes. As the ink dried on the paper, I felt that ancient rusted chain finally snap. I was completely and utterly free. I slid the document back to Mr. Vogel, stood up, and buttoned my suit jacket. I returned to the brick estate in the late afternoon. The very same house Kendra had so aggressively attempted to auction off for quick cash was now entirely silent, fully restored to its rightful, tranquil state. The splintered front door had been replaced with solid, reinforced steel. The oak floorboards in the master bedroom concealing the heavy iron safe that held the master ledger of my empire remained completely undisturbed. I walked slowly into the living room, my cane tapping a steady, rhythmic beat against the polished wood. I approached the stone mantel above the fireplace. Resting in the exact center was a framed photograph of Cynthia. It was the very same photograph Kendra had violently kicked across the concrete driveway just weeks ago, now carefully reframed behind pristine, flawless glass. I struck a wooden match, the sharp scent of sulfur cutting through the stagnant indoor air, and lit a single stick of sandalwood incense. I placed it in the small brass burner beside her portrait, watching the thin ribbon of white smoke curl slowly upward toward the ceiling. I stood there for a very long time, looking into my late wife's gentle eyes, feeling a profound, heavy stillness settle over my spirit. For 8 agonizing years, I had treated my personal life like a compromised, high-risk financial ledger. I had willingly absorbed a massive, crushing deficit of public shame, familial hatred, and absolute isolation, just to ensure Cynthia's final days remained in the black, completely shielded from the horrifying bankruptcy of our daughter's soul. I had genuinely believed that enduring that specific pain was the ultimate manifestation of unconditional love. But sitting in the quiet, undisturbed solitude of my reclaimed home, I finally understood the catastrophic flaw in my previous calculations. Unconditional love does not mean unconditional absolution. By absorbing Kendra's monstrous sins, I had not protected her from the world. I had simply delayed the collection of a moral debt that was compounding with deadly exponential interest. Fatherhood is a complex, often agonizing responsibility. We are biologically programmed to shield our children from the harsh, unforgiving consequences of reality. But when a child willingly transforms into a ruthless predator, when they weaponize that very biological instinct to extract your lifeblood and destroy your sanity, the absolute most loving thing a parent can do is step out of the way and let the universe deliver its brutal, necessary correction. I did not crush Kendra out of malice or petty, unrefined vengeance. I crushed her out of a profound, overriding commitment to universal balance. I stripped away her stolen wealth, her fraudulent reputation, and her unearned comfort, because it was the absolute only way to introduce her to the undeniable reality of accountability. Punishment, when applied with surgical precision and devoid of emotional rage, is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of respect. It demands that the transgressor finally acknowledge the actual weight of their own existence and the devastating ripple effect of their choices. I looked at Cynthia's smiling face in the photograph, knowing with absolute unshakable certainty that she would finally understand. The debt she had tearfully begged me to forgive on her deathbed had mutated into a malignant cancer that threatened to consume my entire life. I had to surgically excise the tumor to survive. I reached out and gently brushed my fingertips against the cold glass of the wooden frame. The ledger is finally balanced. My love, I whispered into the quiet room. You can rest now. I turned away from the mantel, leaning heavily on my cane, but feeling physically lighter than I had in a decade. I walked slowly through the quiet halls of the brick estate, inspecting the pristine walls and the meticulously arranged furniture. This house was no longer a silent, suffocating tomb haunted by the ghosts of betrayal and theft. It was a fortified sanctuary. It was the physical, undeniable manifestation of my absolute endurance. I had survived the darkest, most treacherous depths of human greed orchestrated by the very people who were supposed to be my family. I had navigated a dangerous labyrinth of psychological warfare, legal extortion, and medical fraud, and I had emerged entirely victorious. I reached the front entryway and pulled my heavy wool overcoat from the brass rack. I slid my arms into the tailored sleeves, adjusting the collar with meticulous care. I opened the solid steel front door and stepped out onto the wide concrete porch. The late afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting a rich golden hue across the immaculate green lawns of the neighborhood. I looked up and down the quiet, manicured street. The residents going about their peaceful evening routines, watering their gardens and walking their dogs, had absolutely no idea that the elderly, unassuming black man standing quietly on the porch legally owned the very ground beneath their feet. I did not need them to know. True, unassailable power does not require an audience or a round of applause. It simply exists, silent, heavy, and absolute. I pulled the heavy front door shut behind me. The new high-security deadbolt engaged with a loud, satisfying, and definitive click. That single metallic sound represented the permanent closure of the darkest chapter of my life. The era of the silent suffering victim was officially over. The era of the broken, disgraced widower had been completely eradicated. I walked down the concrete steps, my posture impeccably straight, my head held high. Mitchell was waiting at the curb, standing stoically beside the gleaming black Mercedes sedan. He opened the rear passenger door as I approached, offering a respectful, silent nod. I did not look back at the house. I did not look back at the 8 years of fabricated misery or the treacherous daughter who was currently drowning in the filthy, inescapable consequences of her own making. I slid into the luxurious leather seat, resting my hands firmly on the silver handle of my cane as Mitchell closed the door, sealing me inside the quiet, climate-controlled cabin. I looked out the tinted window as the heavy car smoothly pulled away from the curb, gliding through the vibrant city that stretched out before me. I owned the commercial blocks. I owned the residential streets. I had built an invisible empire from the ashes of a stolen life. But infinitely more important than the property deeds or the massive offshore accounts, for the very first time in my entire existence, I completely and unconditionally owned myself. I am not a casualty of someone else's greed. I am not a tragic footnote in a story written by a monster. I am the architect of my own absolute justice, and I bow to no one. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized one final, undeniable truth. Sometimes the greatest act of love you can show yourself is walking away from the people who share your blood, but not your values. Forgiveness is a noble concept, but it should never be confused with permission to be abused. When you constantly shield toxic family members from the consequences of their actions, you do not heal them, you only destroy yourself. Setting unbreakable boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of profound self-preservation. True family is built on mutual respect and unwavering loyalty, not on the biological accident of birth. If my journey gave you the courage to stand up and set your own boundaries, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below.